"The woman I love deserves this estate more than you ever did." He said it in front of 20 people, to his wife of 7 years. Then he pushed the pen across the table and waited for her to break. Charlotte Bennet did not break. She picked up that pen and she signed. Everyone in that room thought she had lost everything. Not one of them saw what she was about to build. And Nathaniel Bennet would spend the rest of his life understanding exactly what those words had cost him. Subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Virginia summer, 1818. The heat that summer was the kind that settled into your bones and refused to leave. It pressed down on the Bennet estate like a hand against a throat, heavy, patient, unyielding. The tobacco fields stretched wide under a sky so blue it almost looked like a lie. The roses along the front path had bloomed full and perfect, the way they always did when Charlotte tended them herself. The white columns of the main house stood proud in the afternoon sun. It looked to anyone passing on the road like a home that held nothing but peace. But Charlotte Bennet had not felt peace in a very long time. She stood at the window of the upstairs bedroom, a room she still shared with her husband in name, though not in any meaningful way, and she watched the carriages arrive below, one after another. Neighbors, business partners, friends of Nathaniel's who had never particularly bothered to be friends of hers. 20 guests all told. Nathaniel had called it a dinner. Charlotte had a feeling it was something else entirely. She had known something was wrong for months. Not in the dramatic way people imagined betrayal. No slammed doors, no tearful confessions, no rage-filled accusations in the middle of the night. It had been quieter than that. Smaller. The kind of wrong that crept in through the cracks and made itself comfortable before you ever thought to look for it. It was the way Nathaniel stopped asking her opinion about the land decisions. The way his eyes moved past her face when she spoke like he was listening to something she couldn't hear. The way Victoria Ashford's name started appearing in conversations first once, then twice, then so regularly that Charlotte had begun to notice its absence when it didn't come up. Victoria Ashford, 26 years old, the daughter of a land speculator from Richmond who had made a fortune and then lost half of it, which left his daughter with fine manners, a beautiful face, and a very pressing need for security. Charlotte had met her twice. Both times Victoria had smiled at her with the particular warmth of a woman who needed something from you. Charlotte had recognized it immediately. She had simply not understood at the time what it was that Victoria needed. Now she did. Jette. She came down the stairs at precisely 7 o'clock the way she always did. Her dress was the dark blue one, not the finest she owned, but the one that fit her well and made her feel like herself. She had pinned her hair herself. She had not asked the maid for help. She didn't know exactly why, except that some instinct told her she would want to have done things herself tonight. The dining hall was already filled with noise and candlelight. Charlotte walked through the door and the noise did not stop, but something shifted. A few faces turned toward her. Eyes dropped. Conversations found sudden absorbing new directions. She understood then, with the clarity of a woman who had spent 7 years learning to read a room, that most of the people in this hall already knew what was about to happen. She was the only one who had not been told. Nathaniel was standing at the head of the table. He looked as he always looked, like a man who had been born to stand in exactly that spot, broad-shouldered, confident, wearing the kind of ease that came from never having doubted himself a day in his life. He was 41 years old, and he had not yet begun to lose the handsomeness that had made her fall in love with him at 19. She had spent a long time loving that face. She looked at it now and felt something very quiet and very final settle in her chest. Victoria Ashford stood 2 feet to his left. She was wearing ivory. Charlotte almost admired the audacity of it. Charlotte. Nathaniel's voice was even, controlled. He had rehearsed this, she realized. He had stood somewhere, maybe in this very room, and practiced the tone of voice he would use when he did this to her. "I'm glad you're here." "I live here," she said. Someone near the back of the table coughed. Nathaniel didn't flinch. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew a folded document. He set it on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man placing down something heavy. "I think it's time we spoke honestly," he said, "about the future." Charlotte did not move toward the table. "Then speak." He glanced at Victoria, just for a moment, just long enough for Charlotte to see it. "Our marriage," Nathaniel said, "has not been what either of us needed it to be. I think we both know that." "Do we?" Charlotte said. It was not a question. "I believe this arrangement has run its course." He straightened. "I have made provisions that I believe are more than fair. The cottage at the east edge of the property, a quarterly income, and I intend to handle the dissolution quietly and with discretion, so that your reputation—" "What is that document?" Charlotte said. Silence. Nathaniel looked at the paper on the table. "It is a transfer deed." "Transferring what?" He didn't answer immediately. "Nathaniel." Her voice was still steady. She was somewhat amazed by that. "Transferring what?" "The estate," he said. "The main property. The house, the surrounding land, the southern fields. Everything." Charlotte looked at Victoria. Victoria had the grace to look at the floor. "To her," Charlotte said. "I want to ensure that Victoria has security," Nathaniel said, and the way he said it, the warmth that crept into his voice on her name, was the most painful thing Charlotte had heard in years. Not because it was new, because it confirmed something she had spent months telling herself was not true. She deserves stability, a real home. I intend to provide that for her. "And what do I deserve?" Charlotte said. "The cottage," he said, "and the income, and—" "You're giving her my home," Charlotte said. "You're giving away the house I have managed for 7 years, the land I understand better than anyone in this county, and you're giving it to a woman you have known for 8 months, a year. Charlotte, and you've invited 20 people to watch you do it." She looked around the room, at the faces that couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Because you thought I would make a scene, and you wanted witnesses. You thought having an audience would keep me quiet." "That's not—" "Or," she said, and her voice dropped lower. "You wanted them here because you needed them to see it done. Because you knew that if you tried to do this privately, you might not go through with it." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "The document needs to be signed tonight." "Then let's sign it." She walked to the table. The room went absolutely still. Nathaniel blinked. "Charlotte, give me the pen." "I don't think you understand what you're—" "Give me the pen, Nathaniel." He hesitated. Then slowly he slid the pen across the table. Charlotte picked it up. She looked at the deed. She read every line of it standing there in front of 20 witnesses in the candlelit dining hall of the home she had spent 7 years building into something worth having. She read it slowly and carefully. She let the room wait. Then she signed her name. Clean. Certain. Not a tremor. She set the pen down. "Kick." The silence lasted 3 full seconds before Nathaniel spoke. "What are you doing?" "What you asked me to do," Charlotte said. "You didn't even—" He stared at the signature. "You didn't fight it." "No." "You didn't argue. You didn't ask for more. You didn't—" He stopped. Something moved across his face that she couldn't quite name. It might have been relief, and it might have been something else entirely. "Why?" Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. "Because you wanted this," she said. "And I've spent 7 years making sure you got what you wanted. I saw no reason to stop now." She turned to Victoria Ashford. Victoria was still holding her careful expression of humility, but her hand Charlotte had noticed, and she suspected several other people in the room had noticed too. Her hand was already reaching for the deed. "Miss Ashford," Charlotte said. Victoria looked up. "The house you're receiving," Charlotte said. "The land attached to it. Do you know what makes it valuable?" Victoria blinked. The property is—" "Not the house," Charlotte said. "Not the size of it. Not the columns out front. Do you know what makes that land worth what it's worth? Do you know why the Bennett estate has maintained its value when half the estates in this county have started failing?" Victoria said nothing. Nathaniel said, "Charlotte, this isn't necessary. "It isn't necessary," Charlotte agreed. "Most of the things I've done for this family weren't strictly necessary. They were simply what I did because I understood what needed doing." She looked around the room one more time at the faces at the candles, at the gleaming table she had chosen herself the year after she was married, at the curtains she had helped hang when the old ones had finally worn through. "I hope you'll be very happy here," she said to no one in particular. Then she picked up her gloves from the sideboard where she had set them when she came in, and she walked out. The night air was warm and thick with the smell of summer grass. Charlotte stood on the front steps for a moment, looking out at the long drive at the fields beyond the fence line that glowed pale silver under the half-moon. She breathed in. She breathed out. She was not going to cry. Not here. Not where any of them might see. She heard the front door open behind her. "Mrs. Bennet." She turned. It was Thomas Caldwell, the estate manager. He had worked for Nathaniel for 6 years. He had always been polite to her, technically carefully polite the way men were polite to women they didn't particularly respect, but also didn't want to offend. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. He stood in the doorway holding his hat. His expression was something between discomfort and calculation. "I wanted to say that was a difficult thing what happened in there." "It was," she agreed. "If there's anything I can do to assist with the transition." "That's very kind," she said. "But I think I'll manage the transition myself." He nodded slowly. His eyes moved past her to the fields. "The cottage on the east end, it's been empty a while. It may need some attention." "Then I'll give it attention." He put his hat back on. "Good night, Mrs. Bennet." "Good night, Mr. Caldwell." He went back inside. Charlotte stood there a moment longer. She thought about the conversation she had not had with Nathaniel, the things she had not said to him. Not because she didn't have words. She had an abundance of words, but because she had learned over 7 years of marriage to a man who heard very little of what she actually said, that some things were better kept close. Held quietly like a card that hadn't been played yet. She thought about her father, William Ashby. Dead 6 years now. A surveyor who had spent his whole life walking land and reading it the way other men read books. Who had taught her when she was 12 and 16 and 22 that most people looked at land and saw what was on top of it. The house, the crops, the fences. And that the people who understood it were the ones who looked underneath. She thought about the surveys he had left her. Old documents dense with measurements and notations that she had spent years studying. That she had brought with her when she married Nathaniel, tucked into the bottom of a traveling trunk. And that she had continued to study in the evenings when Nathaniel thought she was reading novels. She thought about what those surveys had shown her, about the East Field, about the land Nathaniel had just handed her, the abandoned land, the land everyone in the county had dismissed for 20 years as rocky, untillable good for nothing. The land beneath which her father had documented in careful handwriting the presence of a natural spring. The same underground water source that the Bennet estate depended on. The same source that, if it was managed correctly, could support not just the estate, but 3 times the acreage of farmland currently in operation. Charlotte had known about it since her first year of marriage. She had never told Nathaniel. Not from spite, or not only from spite. She had told herself for years that she was waiting for the right moment, that she would share it when the time was appropriate, that she would... She stopped. She was honest enough with herself, standing there in the warm summer night, with the sound of voices drifting faintly from inside the house, to admit that there had always been a part of her that had held it back. Not because she wanted to harm the estate. She had spent 7 years protecting this estate. She had given more of herself to this land than Nathaniel would ever know or acknowledge. But she had known somewhere in the part of herself she didn't examine too closely that as long as she held that knowledge, she was not entirely powerless. That as long as that information was hers, only hers, she mattered, even when everything else made her feel like she didn't. She looked at the fields one more time. Then she walked down the steps and across the drive and into the darkness of the summer night. The cottage was everything Nathaniel had said it would be: small, empty, and badly in need of repair. The door stuck when she pushed it. The windows hadn't been opened in so long that the air inside smelled of dust and closed-up time. A mouse had made a home in the corner of the kitchen, and she could hear it skittering away as she came in with the single candle she'd brought from the main house. One of the small things she'd taken before she left: candles, a few books. The traveling trunk with her father's surveys, a change of clothes, and the miniature portrait of her mother that had sat on her dressing table. 20 guests had just watched her give away a 12-room estate. She had left with a candle and a trunk. She set the candle on the kitchen table and sat down. The silence was enormous. She had been prepared for a lot of things tonight. She had been prepared for Nathaniel's coldness, for the witnesses, for the document. She had been prepared for Victoria's careful performance of reluctance. She had been prepared for the feeling of walking out. She had not been prepared for the quiet. She pressed her hands flat on the table. Stop, she told herself. Think. She had the cottage. She had the quarterly income, modest but not nothing. She had her father's surveys. She had 20 years of watching her father walk land and 7 years of managing an estate that no one had ever given her credit for managing. And she had a piece of land beneath which lay something that could change everything. She was 41 years old. She had started with less. Actually, she hadn't. At 19, she had married a man she loved and walked into what she thought would be a partnership. But she had learned more from the years since than she had given herself credit for. She pulled her father's survey book out of the trunk. She set it on the table next to the candle. She opened it. And she began to plan. She did not sleep much that first night. By dawn, she had made a list. A practical list, the kind her father would have approved of, not of feelings or grievances or the things she wished were different, but of resources, of steps, of what could be done with what she actually had. Water source. Confirmed location, east section below the rocky ridge. Timeline. Spring activation, earliest next season. Requirements. Labor. Materials. Capital. Capital quarterly income until other income established. Reputation currently damaged. Can rebuild through work. She stopped at that last one. Reputation. She knew what the county would be saying. She had no illusions about that. 20 witnesses had watched her sign away her home without a word of protest. Some of them would call it dignity. Most of them would call it defeat. They would say Nathaniel had discarded her, and she had simply accepted it, and that was the end of the Charlotte Bennett story. Let them say it. She had learned from 7 years of managing an estate that Nathaniel got credit for, that it was possible to do the most important work in any room and have no one notice you doing it. That was, in fact, sometimes an advantage. She closed the survey book. She went to the door of the cottage and opened it and stood in the early morning light with the dew still on the grass and the fields stretching out in every direction, and she thought about the year ahead. It was going to be hard. She had no illusions about that either. But hard and impossible were not the same thing. She had never confused the two. The first person to come see her was Eleanor Hayes. Eleanor was 63 years old, the widow of a farmer who had worked the land 2 miles east of the estate, and she was the closest thing Charlotte had to a friend in the county. She arrived at the cottage door 3 days after the dinner, carrying a basket of bread and preserves, and wearing the expression of a woman who had come prepared to either offer comfort or practical assistance, depending on which was needed. Charlotte opened the door and said, "Come in." Eleanor came in, looked at the cottage cleaner, now aired out with the mouse evicted, and the windows repaired, and a small fire going in the hearth, and set the basket down. "You look better than I expected," Eleanor said. "I feel better than expected," Charlotte said. "Sit down. I'll make tea." Charlotte. Eleanor sat. "I won't pretend I don't know what happened. Most of the county knows what happened." "I assumed as much. People are saying—" "I know what they're saying." Eleanor watched her. "You're not going to tell me what you're thinking, are you?" "I'm thinking I need to repair the east fence before fall," Charlotte said. And I'm thinking about talking to some of the local families about their water access, because I have reason to believe—" She stopped. "I'm thinking about a great many practical things, Eleanor." Eleanor picked up a piece of bread and considered it. "And Nathaniel." Charlotte brought the tea to the table and sat across from her friend. "Nathaniel," she said, "has everything he thought he wanted. And does he—" Charlotte looked out the window at the fields. "He will," she said, "for a while." Eleanor said nothing for a moment. Then, "What did you mean at the dinner, about the house being valuable because someone understood it?" Charlotte smiled. It was the first real smile she had managed in days. "I meant exactly what I said," she told her friend, Charlotte Ashby Bennett. Eleanor leaned forward. "What do you know that the rest of us don't?" Charlotte looked at her, this woman who had been kind to her when others weren't, who had come 3 days later with bread and no performance of pity, and she made a decision. "Let me show you something," she said. She brought out the survey book. She opened it to the page her father had marked. Eleanor stared at it for a long moment. Then she looked up. "Lord above," Eleanor said quietly. "Charlotte, does Nathaniel know?" "No," Charlotte said. "Does anyone?" "You," Charlotte said. "Now." Eleanor sat back slowly. "What are you going to do with it?" Charlotte looked at the land through the cottage window. At the rocky ridge at the far eastern edge. At the ground that everyone in the county had called worthless. "I'm going to do what I've always done," she said. "And what's that?" Charlotte closed the survey book. "Take care of it," she said. The summer moved forward the way summers do, slowly, at first, then all at once. Charlotte worked. She repaired the cottage roof with help from a young man named James, who farmed a quarter-mile to the north and was willing to trade labor for the use of her father's surveying tools. She mended fences. She turned over the kitchen garden that had been left wild and planted what the season still had room for. She began talking to the families in the area quietly without announcement about the land. About water. About what she believed was there. Not everyone listened. The Harpers 3 miles out told their oldest son to thank Mrs. Bennett kindly, but they weren't interested in being involved in whatever dispute she was having with her husband. The Millers took one look at the survey book and said the spring had been talked about for 50 years, and nobody had found it yet, so what made her think she would? But the Garfields listened, and the Wests, and Eleanor, who had spent her life trusting her instincts about people, told anyone who asked that Charlotte Ashby Bennett was the most capable woman in the county, and if she said the water was there, it was there. Slowly. Slowly, the way things that actually last tend to build. Charlotte started to have allies. Meanwhile, at the Bennett estate, things were not going well. She heard it first from Eleanor, who heard it from the Garfields, who had spoken to one of the field workers. The harvest numbers were down, not dramatically, not enough to cause immediate alarm, but enough that people who knew the land noticed. The south fields, which had produced reliably for a decade, were coming in thin. The tobacco crop was 20% below expectations. Nathaniel, according to Eleanor's sources, had attributed it to the dry summer. Charlotte knew better. The dry summer was real. But it shouldn't have affected the south fields that much, not if the water channels were being maintained correctly. Her father's surveys had shown her exactly how the underground water moved beneath the estate, which channels needed to be cleared, and when, which drainage patterns to watch. She had managed those systems herself for years, quietly, without announcement, as part of the general running of the house that Nathaniel never asked about, because things had always worked, and he had never thought to wonder why. She wondered if Thomas Caldwell was maintaining them. She suspected he was not. In late August, she saw Nathaniel for the first time since the dinner. She was at the market in town, purchasing seed and some basic tools, and he was coming out of the land office with Caldwell beside him. He almost didn't see her. Then he did. He stopped. Caldwell stopped beside him, glancing between them. Charlotte finished speaking to the merchant, paid for her seed, and turned. Nathaniel, she said. Charlotte? He looked different, she thought. Or maybe it was just that she was seeing him differently. You look well? Thank you. She picked up her basket. How is the estate? Something moved across his face. Fine, he said. Everything is fine. Good, she said. I'm glad to hear it. She moved to walk past him. Charlotte. She stopped. He was quiet for a moment. Caldwell was standing very carefully still, looking at a point 6 inches above Charlotte's head. The roses, Nathaniel said finally. Along the front path, they're... He stopped, started again. Do you know what we should be doing with them this time of year? Charlotte looked at him. Yes, she said. Could you... He paused. Could you tell me... She studied his face. It was not a comfortable face right now. It was the face of a man who had asked a question he hadn't planned on asking and wasn't sure how to handle the fact that he'd asked it. Trim back the dead growth, she said. But don't cut too deep. The roots need to stay strong for the fall. He nodded slowly. Thank you, he said. Of course, she said. She walked away. She did not look back. But later, sitting in the cottage with her father's survey book and the candle burning low, she thought about his face. She thought about the way he had asked about the roses. And she thought not with triumph, not with the bitterness she might have expected. She thought, he is beginning to notice. Not her, not yet, but the absence of something, the missing something that had made the estate function, that had kept the roses alive and the water channels clear and the harvest numbers where they needed to be and the accounts balanced and the staff working and the neighbors cooperative and the whole complicated living system of a working estate moving forward without anyone quite realizing it was being driven. He was beginning to notice the silence where she used to be. She was not glad. She was not satisfied. She was something more complicated than either of those things. Something that didn't have a clean name, something that sat at the center of her chest and felt like the beginning of understanding a very long story that she was still in the middle of. She turned to a new page in her notebook. She wrote, Water Survey Phase 2. Begin next week. She thought for a moment. Then she wrote, This is not about him. She underlined it. This was never just about him. She closed the notebook. The candle burned. Outside, the summer night was warm and full of the sound of crickets and the distant movement of wind through the tobacco fields, the fields that had made this county what it was, the fields that needed what lay beneath her land to survive the fields that Nathaniel had taken back and couldn't quite manage to keep. Charlotte sat in the cottage her husband had given her to get rid of her. And she worked. Because that was what she did. Because that was what she had always done. And because she understood with the clear, quiet certainty of a woman who had spent 7 years learning the truth of things beneath their surface, that understanding something was not the same as being done with it. It was only the beginning. September came in hard and dry, the kind of dry that made the ground crack along the edges of the fields and turned the grass at the roadside to something brittle and pale. Charlotte felt it in the earth when she knelt to work. The kitchen garden felt the way the soil pulled back from her fingers, like it was hoarding whatever moisture it had left. She knew what that meant for the estate. She knew what it meant for every farm in the county. And she knew with the particular certainty of a woman who had spent years reading her father's surveys until the numbers lived inside her like her own heartbeat that the situation was going to get worse before it got better. She did not allow herself to feel satisfied by that. She allowed herself to work. The eastern ridge was harder ground than she had remembered from her father's notes, but she had expected that. She had hired James, the young man from the north quarter, who had helped her with the roof, and 2 of his cousins, and she had explained to them clearly, and without decoration, what she believed was beneath the rocky soil and what finding it would mean. James had looked at the survey book with the focused squint of a person who doesn't read maps often, but is smart enough to follow what they show, and then he had looked at the ridge, and then he had looked at Charlotte. You're certain, he said. My father was certain, she said. And I've had 7 years to check his work. And nobody else knows this is here. Nobody who's looking for it, she said. James nodded slowly. Then he picked up the first tool and got to work. That was what Charlotte liked about James. He didn't need her to be anything other than right. He didn't need her to be a man or younger or less direct. He just needed the information to be accurate, and when it was, he moved. She was learning that there were more people like that in the world than she had previously given herself credit for finding. Eleanor came by twice a week now, not always with food, though she often brought something because Eleanor Hayes had spent 63 years demonstrating love through provisions, and she was not about to stop, but increasingly just to sit and talk and help when she could. She had strong hands for a woman her age. She was not afraid of getting them dirty. One afternoon in the second week of September, Eleanor arrived to find Charlotte on her knees in the east field with her hands in the dirt, and she did not ask why. She simply knelt down beside her. "The Millers came to see me yesterday," Eleanor said. Charlotte looked up. What did they want? They wanted to know if it was true, about the spring. What did you tell them? I told them I'd seen the survey book myself, and that if Charlotte Bennett said the water was there, they'd be fools not to pay attention. Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron. And Eleanor met her eyes. The eldest Miller boy is 17 and strong as an ox. His father wants to know if you'd consider a work trade arrangement, their labor against a share of the water access once you've got it running. Charlotte sat back on her heels. The Miller family had 3 times the acreage she had. If their south fields were suffering the same water stress she suspected every farm in the county was about to feel, then a water arrangement would be worth more to them than cash. Tell them to come Tuesday, Charlotte said. Eleanor smiled. It was the smile of a woman watching something she had believed in beginning to take shape. I will, she said. And Charlotte, there are others. The Garfields have spoken to 2 more families. They're watching what you're doing. Good, Charlotte said. And then because she was tired and her knees hurt, and the ground wasn't cooperating, and she was only human. God, I hope my father was right. Eleanor laughed. It rang out across the field, clear and sharp. He was right about you, Eleanor said. That counts for something. The first twist came on a Thursday. Charlotte was at the edge of the East Ridge, checking the measurements James had taken the previous day against her father's notes when she heard horses on the road. She didn't look up immediately. She had learned to not look up every time someone passed because it made her look like she was waiting for something, and she was not in the business of looking like she was waiting. Then she heard her name. Mrs. Bennett. She looked up. Thomas Caldwell was sitting on a bay horse at the edge of the field. He was wearing his work clothes, which meant he hadn't come to make a social call. He had the expression of a man delivering a message he wasn't entirely certain he'd been authorized to deliver. Charlotte stood up straight. Mr. Caldwell. I hope I'm not disturbing your work. You are, she said pleasantly. But I suspect you know that. What can I do for you? He shifted in the saddle. Mr. Bennett wanted me to come by. He has some questions about the South Field drainage. He believes there may be an issue with the channels. Charlotte looked at him steadily. She had expected this. She had not expected it quite this soon. Tell me, she said, keeping her voice even. How long has the South Field drainage been running below capacity? Caldwell blinked. We've only just noticed. The channels need clearing every spring, Charlotte said. The main intake especially. It silts up over the winter. I had James Whitfield clear it every April for 6 years. She paused. Was it cleared this April? A pause. That pause told her everything. I see, she said. Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Bennett would appreciate. Tell Mr. Bennett, Charlotte said, that I'm sorry to hear about the South Field. And tell him that if the channels aren't cleared before the ground hardens in November, the problem will be considerably worse next spring. He was hoping you might... No, she said. Caldwell stopped. I'm not available to consult on the estate's maintenance, Charlotte said. Her voice was not unkind. She was simply stating a fact. Mr. Bennett made that arrangement very clearly in August. The estate is no longer my concern. I have my own land to manage. Caldwell looked at the East Ridge, at the disturbed earth, at James and his cousins working in the middle distance. Something shifted in his expression, something that moved through discomfort and into something she couldn't quite read. "What are you doing out here?" he said. "If you don't mind my asking." "I do mind," Charlotte said. "Good day, Mr. Caldwell." He left. She waited until the sound of hooves faded before she let herself breathe fully. She picked up her father's survey book and looked at the numbers again. The channels, she thought. He didn't clear the channels. 6 years of careful maintenance, and the man couldn't be bothered to clear the channels. She thought about the South Fields, about what would happen to the harvest if the water flow stayed compromised through another dry season, about the tobacco crop and what 20% below projection this year would look like as 40% below projection next year. She thought about Nathaniel. She felt something that was not quite pity, and not quite satisfaction, and not quite grief, something in the complicated middle space between all three. Then she put the survey book away, and she called to James, and she went back to work. The Miller family came on Tuesday as promised. There were 4 of them. The father, a solid, weathered man named Henry, who looked like he'd been built out of the same material as the farmland he worked, and his 3 sons, the eldest, being the 17-year-old Eleanor had mentioned. The boys were tall and quiet, and had the kind of watchfulness that came from growing up in a household where paying attention was how you survived. Charlotte brought them out to the ridge. She showed Henry the survey book. She explained what her father had found and how she had verified it, and what the spring would mean once they had access to it, not just for her land, but for the whole east section of the county, which sat above the same underground water system. Henry Miller listened without interrupting. He asked 3 questions. They were good questions, specific and practical, and Charlotte answered all 3. When she finished, Henry looked at his eldest son. The son looked at the ground. He looked at his father. He nodded. Henry looked at Charlotte. "What do you want from us?" "2 things, Charlotte said. "Your son's labor through the excavation. James knows what we're doing. He'll direct the work. And your word." "My word," Henry repeated, "that when this is done, you don't sell your access rights to anyone else in the county before you talk to me. The value of the spring depends on managing it correctly. One family selling off access to the highest bidder could damage the whole system." Henry was quiet for a moment. "You've thought this through," he said. "I've had time," she said. He extended his hand. "You have my word, Mrs. Bennet." She shook it. Walking back to the cottage that evening, Eleanor fell into step beside her. "That went well," Eleanor observed. "Better than I expected," Charlotte admitted. "Henry Miller is a practical man." "He is. He's also the kind of man who talks to people. Word will get out." "I know. Are you ready for that?" Charlotte thought about it honestly. "Not entirely," she said, "but I don't think readiness was ever the point." Eleanor bumped her shoulder gently. "Your father would be proud." Charlotte felt the words land somewhere deep and true. "I know," she said quietly. "I think he actually would be." It was the first week of October, when things at the Bennet estate became difficult enough that people started talking openly. Charlotte heard it from 3 different sources in the span of 4 days. First from Eleanor, who had it from the minister's wife. Then from James, who had heard it from one of the field workers who had left the estate the previous month. Then from a woman named Dolores Croft, who ran the dry goods store in town, and knew everything that happened within 20 miles because everyone eventually came to buy dry goods. The Southfield harvest was in. It was bad. Not catastrophic, not yet, but bad enough that Nathaniel had brought in an outside assessor from Richmond, which in this county was the kind of thing you did when you had already run out of local options. The assessor had looked at the fields, looked at the water channels, and apparently told Nathaniel something that had made him leave the meeting early without completing his tea. And the money, according to the field worker who'd left, was not adding up. Charlotte sat with that information for 2 days before she let herself fully think about it. She rolled it around carefully the way you rolled a stone in your hand before you decided whether to set it down or throw it. Thomas Caldwell had been estate manager for 6 years. Charlotte had managed the household accounts for 5 of those 6 years until Nathaniel had quietly shifted that responsibility to Caldwell 18 months ago. At the time, Charlotte had understood it as part of the broader dismissal, the gradual process by which Nathaniel had been removing her from any role that actually mattered, replacing her participation with his confidence in a man who told him what he wanted to hear. She had said nothing, but she had noticed. She pulled out the notebook where she kept her own records, the ones she'd maintained in parallel, out of habit or stubbornness, or the particular anxiety of a woman who has learned not to trust that things are being handled correctly unless she checks herself. She'd stopped updating them when Caldwell took over the accounts, but the records she had were from the 4 years before that. She knew what the numbers were supposed to look like. She compared them to what she was hearing now. She sat very still for a long time. Then she went to Eleanor's house. Eleanor opened the door before Charlotte could knock. She took one look at her face and stepped back. "Come in," she said. Charlotte came in. She sat down at Eleanor's kitchen table, which was where the two of them solved most things, and she set the notebook on the table and said, "I need to tell you something, and then I need you to tell me if I'm seeing this wrong." Eleanor sat down across from her. "Tell me." "Caldwell," Charlotte said. "When he took over the household accounts, did you hear anything at the time? Any reason Nathaniel gave anyone who asked questions?" Eleanor thought about it. Nathaniel said something about efficiency, about having one person managing both the field operations and the accounts. It made sense on the surface. "It doesn't make sense," Charlotte said. "Not on the estate. The field management and the household accounts serve completely different functions. The only reason to combine them under one person is if that person wants to control what each side knows about the other." Eleanor was very still. "Charlotte, the harvest numbers have been declining for 3 years, Charlotte said. "Not dramatically. Not the way this year's numbers look, because this year there's a real water problem compounding it. But declining. I can see it in the pattern." She opened the notebook. "And the payments to outside contractors, the ones Caldwell was managing, they don't track with what we were actually getting done. I remember every repair that was made in those 4 years, Eleanor. I know what was contracted and what was completed because I was the one checking. The numbers that went through the accounts were higher, consistently higher." Eleanor looked at the notebook. Then she looked at Charlotte. "You think he's been stealing?" Eleanor said quietly. "I think he's been stealing," Charlotte said. "Carefully, slowly, in amounts small enough that nobody would notice unless they were looking closely and knew what they were looking for. And you knew what you were looking for." "I knew the estate," Charlotte said. "I knew it the way I know this county because I paid attention when nobody expected me to." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Charlotte," she said slowly, "if you're right, this is serious. This isn't just about the estate's accounts. If Caldwell has been taking money for years, the estate's difficulties are at least partly his doing," Charlotte said. "Not all of it. The water channel issue is real, the dry summer is real. But some of what Nathaniel is looking at right now, the numbers that don't add up the money that isn't there." She stopped. "He has no idea. Are you going to tell him?" The question sat between them. Charlotte looked at her notebook, at the careful numbers, at 7 years of a woman paying attention to a home that was also being stolen from, and the man who owned it never asking how she knew to look. "Not yet," she said. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "I need to be certain," Charlotte said. "Before I take this to anyone, I need to be absolutely certain. If I'm wrong, even slightly wrong, I'm the bitter divorced wife making accusations against the man who replaced her. Nobody will look at the evidence. They'll look at me." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "You're right," she said. "I'm always right," Charlotte said. "Nobody ever notices." Eleanor laughed, despite herself. Then she sobered. "What do you need?" "Access," Charlotte said. "To someone who can look at Caldwell's current records without raising suspicion. Someone with a legitimate reason to be at the estate." Eleanor thought. "Henry Miller," she said. Charlotte frowned. "Henry doesn't have business at the estate." "He does now," Eleanor said. "Nathaniel approached Henry last week about borrowing a piece of drainage equipment. Henry mentioned it to me in passing. He's supposed to go over there next Wednesday to discuss it." She met Charlotte's eyes. "Henry is a practical man, you said so yourself. And he's observant. If you told him what to look for—" "I don't want to involve him in this," Charlotte said. "If it goes wrong—" "If it goes wrong, he walked over to discuss drainage equipment and happened to notice some things," Eleanor said. "Henry Miller has been farming this county for 40 years. He knows how to notice things without being seen doing it." Charlotte looked at her. "You trust him," she said. "I trust him," Eleanor confirmed. Charlotte closed the notebook. "Wednesday," she said. The days between felt longer than they should have. Charlotte kept working on the spring project. The excavation was slow, the ground giving up its secrets reluctantly, the way significant things tend to, and she kept her face composed and her conversations practical, and she did not let herself think too much about Nathaniel. She did not always succeed at that last part. There were moments in the middle of a task when a memory would surface with the suddenness of something thrown at her from behind. Not the bad ones, or not only the bad ones. The early ones. The first winter of their marriage, when they had sat together by the fire in the library, and he had asked her about her father's surveys, and actually listened to her answers. The year the South Fields had a blight scare, and she had talked him through the old remediation method she'd read about in one of her father's agricultural journals. And it had worked, and he had laughed with the relief of a man who hadn't expected a solution, and found one, and looked at her with something that she had understood at the time as love. She wondered sometimes what had happened to that man. She didn't wonder long. She had 7 years of watching the answer happen gradually, and without announcement, the way erosion worked, not a single breaking moment, but the slow, patient loss of soil from a riverbank, year by year, until one day you looked and the bank was simply gone. He had stopped looking at her, and then he had stopped seeing her, and then he had stopped understanding what she was or what she contributed until he had reached a point where he could sit in that dining room and give away her home as though it were merely a property transaction and not the dismantling of a person. And she had let him. That was the part she had to sit with. Not with guilt. She refused to perform guilt for someone else's failures. But honestly, she had let it happen in part because she had believed that doing the work was enough. That if she just kept the channels clear and the rose bushes trimmed and the harvest numbers strong and the household running, that would matter. That eventually he would look up from whatever he was looking at and see it. She had been wrong about that. She would not be wrong about it again. Henry Miller came to see her on Tuesday evening, the day before his planned visit to the estate. He stood in the doorway of the cottage, hat in hand, with the particular stillness of a man who had decided to come, but hadn't fully decided what to say when he got there. "Come in, Mr. Miller," Charlotte said. He came in. He sat. He accepted the tea she offered and held it without drinking it. "Eleanor told me," he said. "What you think is happening." "What do you think?" Charlotte said. He turned his hat in his hands. "I think Caldwell has always been a man who watches which way the wind's blowing and makes sure he's on the right side of it. I never trusted him particularly, but I also never had cause. And now Eleanor tells me you have numbers. I have records, consistent patterns across 4 years. They aren't conclusive on their own, I know that. But they're a start." Henry looked at her steadily. He was the kind of man who looked at you when he was thinking not away from you, and Charlotte had learned in the past weeks that she appreciated that. "What do you need me to see?" he said. She told him. She was specific. She wasn't asking him to do anything improper. She wasn't asking him to take documents or make accusations. She was asking him to pay attention to certain things. The equipment shed, and whether the newer equipment Nathaniel had supposedly purchased the previous year was actually there. The state of the Southfield channels, and whether they showed the kind of long-term neglect that wouldn't result from just missing one spring clearing. The general condition of the estate operation relative to what Nathaniel believed it to be. Henry listened to all of it. When she finished, he said, You're trying to protect him. Charlotte stopped. Nathaniel, Henry said. You're not trying to hurt him. You're trying to find out what's actually happening before he loses the estate entirely. Charlotte was very still. He took your home, Henry said. It was not an accusation. It was simply a fact set down carefully between them. He did, Charlotte said. And you're still? Henry stopped himself. He made a mistake, Charlotte said. Several mistakes. But whatever I think of those mistakes, the estate isn't just his. It's this county. It's the farms that use its water and its roads and its systems. It's the families that work those fields. If it fails because of Caldwell's theft and Nathaniel's ignorance, that isn't just his consequence. She looked at Henry. And I understand that land. I understand it better than anyone who currently has authority over it. That matters, even if I wish it didn't. Henry was quiet for a long moment. Then he put his hat on. I'll go tomorrow, he said, and I'll look carefully. Thank you, Charlotte said. He stood to leave, and then he paused at the door. Mrs. Bennet, he said, the spring, the one your father found. When you find it, what's your intention? To manage it correctly, she said. To make it available to every farm that needs it under terms that are fair and sustainable. Not to get rich off of it. Not to hold it over anyone's head. She met his eyes. To take care of it. The way things should be taken care of. Henry nodded. That's what I thought, he said. Good night, Mrs. Bennet. He left. Charlotte stood alone in the cottage for a long moment. Outside, the October night was cool and clear, and somewhere under the ridge at the edge of her small, overlooked piece of land water was moving through the dark earth, patient and hidden, and completely indifferent to the human drama above it. It had been there a long time. It would still be there. She just had to reach it. Chug. Henry came back on Wednesday evening with the expression of a man who had found exactly what he expected to find and was not pleased about it. Charlotte opened the door before he knocked. He came in. He sat. He did not accept tea this time. The equipment, he said. The harvesting machine Caldwell supposedly purchased last year. It isn't there. Charlotte's jaw tightened. The Southfield channels, Henry continued. It wasn't 1 year of neglect. The buildup I saw in those channels is 3, maybe 4 years of inadequate maintenance. There were sections that had never been properly cleared since the original installation. Charlotte thought about that. Thought about 6 years of Caldwell having control of the maintenance schedule, about 5 years of him controlling the accounts. And the workers, Henry said. I talked to 2 of them casually, just conversation, while Nathaniel was meeting with someone inside. They said there have been outside contractors coming to the estate regularly, but neither of them could tell me what the contractors were actually doing or point to any work that had been completed. Ghost contractors, Charlotte said. Henry looked at her. He's billing for labor that isn't happening, and equipment that isn't being purchased, Charlotte said, and maintenance that isn't being done. She sat back. How long do you think it's been going on? If the channel buildup is 4 years, at least 4 years. 4 years. She had been managing the household accounts for 5 of Caldwell's 6 years on the estate. For the first 2 years, she had checked his work. For the 3rd year, she had been distracted by, she didn't remember what exactly, but Nathaniel had been expanding the North Fields, and there had been a great deal to manage, and she had trusted the numbers more than she should have, because they were close enough to write. In the 4th year, Nathaniel had given Caldwell the accounts entirely, and Caldwell had waited until Charlotte wasn't watching anymore. She felt a cold fury move through her that was clean and clarifying. Charlotte, Henry said quietly, this is serious. This man has been stealing from Nathaniel for years. He's damaged the estate significantly. If this goes on, it's not going on, Charlotte said. Henry looked at her. What are you going to do? Charlotte was quiet for a moment. This was the point she had known was coming. The point where the decision she'd been building toward for weeks had to actually be made. She could hold what she knew quietly. She could let it unfold on its own time, let Nathaniel discover it or not discover it on his own. She could protect herself from the position of the woman who interfered in an estate that was no longer hers, who stepped back into a situation that had dismissed her, who offered help to a man who had given away her home to someone else. Or she could do what she always did. "I need to write a letter," she said. Henry raised an eyebrow. "Not to Nathaniel," she said. "Not yet. First to the Richmond assessor, the one Nathaniel brought in. If he's already looking at the numbers, then what I have might be enough to direct him toward what he hasn't found yet." She paused. "If an outside assessor uncovers this independently, Nathaniel can't dismiss it as my interference. He can't say it's personal." Henry looked at her steadily. "You've already thought this through," he said. "I've been thinking since October," she said, "about what's right and what's strategic and whether those two things can be the same thing." She met his eyes. "I think they can be, but it has to be done carefully. And if Caldwell finds out you're involved—" Charlotte thought about Caldwell on his horse at the edge of the east field, about the look on his face when he'd seen James and his cousins working the ridge, about the question he'd asked, "What are you doing out here?" with that expression she hadn't been able to fully read. "He already suspects something," she said. "I think he's been watching me." Henry's eyes sharpened. "Then you need to move quickly." "I know," she said. She picked up her pen. She began to write. The letter went out on Thursday morning, carried by Eleanor's nephew, who was riding to Richmond for other business and was willing to stop at the assessor's office. Charlotte told no one else. She went about her work. She checked the excavation on the ridge, which was progressing slowly, reliably, the way the important things in her life had always progressed. She met with the Garfields and confirmed the water access terms she had worked out with the Millers would extend to them as well. She repaired the fence along the north edge of her property, working alongside James in the October cold. She waited, and on the 7th day after the letter, without warning, without announcement, she found out that Caldwell knew. She was at the market in town, purchasing flour and lamp oil when she saw him. He was across the street speaking to a man she didn't recognize, someone from out of town by the look of him. They were speaking close and quickly, the way people spoke when the conversation wasn't meant to be seen. Caldwell glanced up, and his eyes found her across the street with the deliberateness of someone who had been looking for her. He did not look away. Charlotte did not look away either. They looked at each other for 3 full seconds across the morning street, and in those 3 seconds, Charlotte understood something she had not fully understood before. Thomas Caldwell was afraid, which meant he knew the assessor had new information, which meant something was already moving. She picked up her basket. She turned. She walked home without hurrying because running would have told him something she wasn't willing to tell him. But her heart was moving fast, and when she got home, she sat down at the table and pressed her hands flat on the surface, and breathed carefully and deliberately until she was steady again. "It's moving," she told herself. "Stay steady. Stay working. Let it move." She looked out the window at the East Ridge, at the place where in 3 weeks, maybe 2, if the ground kept cooperating, she was going to find something that had been hidden for 20 years. Something patient. Something real. Something that had been there all along, waiting for the right person to look. She picked up her father's survey book. She turned to the page she knew by heart. She read it again anyway. Because some things were worth coming back to. Some things deserved to be read more than once, looked at, carefully understood, not just in the mind, but in the whole body. The way the ground understood water, not as an idea, but as a presence, a fact. A living thing that changed everything it touched. She was going to find it, and when she did, nothing about what came next would ever be the same. The letter reached the assessor on a Monday. Charlotte knew because Eleanor's nephew sent word back, a short note. Nothing dramatic, just delivered and received. The gentleman read it immediately and asked who had sent it. Eleanor's nephew had said, as instructed, that it was an anonymous party with first-hand knowledge of the estate's management history. The assessor had asked no further questions. He had simply folded the note and set it in his coat pocket with the careful deliberateness of a man who already suspected something, and had just been handed the shape of it. Charlotte read Eleanor's nephew's note twice, then she burned it. She was not being theatrical. She was being careful. There was a difference, and she had learned in the past 2 months to hold that difference clearly. She went back to work. The excavation on the East Ridge was at its most difficult phase. The layer of dense clay that her father's notes had described as sitting approximately 4 feet above the water-bearing rock. James had called it the hardest earth he'd ever put a tool to, which Charlotte took as confirmation they were in exactly the right place. Easy ground didn't sit on top of something worth finding. She had learned that from her father, too. She was on the ridge herself on a Tuesday morning. Not digging, her hands were not young enough for the heavy work, and she knew it, but measuring, checking, comparing what they were finding against the survey marks when she heard a horse on the road below. She did not look up immediately. Then she heard her name, and the voice was not Caldwell's. It was Nathaniel's. He was alone. That was the first thing she noticed. No Caldwell beside him. No Victoria. No witness of any kind. Just Nathaniel Bennett on a chestnut horse looking down at her from the road with an expression she had not seen on his face in a very long time. Something uncertain. Something stripped of its usual assurance. He looked, she thought, like a man who had not been sleeping well. "Charlotte," he said. "Nathaniel." She set her measuring line down. She did not move toward him. "You're a long way from the main house." "I wanted to speak with you." He dismounted. He didn't approach the ridge. He stood at the road's edge, giving her the distance which she noticed. "I came alone." "I can see that." "May I—" He stopped, started again. "May I come down there?" She studied him for a moment. James and his cousins were working 20 feet behind her. She could hear their tools. She was not alone. She had learned not to have conversations she might need witnesses for without making sure she had them. "Come down," she said. He made his way down from the road. He looked at the work, at the disturbed earth, the equipment, the 3 young men working steadily, and she watched his face try to process what he was seeing. "What are you building?" he said. "I'm not building anything," she said. "I'm finding something." He looked at her. "What?" "Water," she said simply. His expression shifted. "Charlotte, on this land. This land is gauche, rocky and worthless," she said. "Yes, I know what everyone thinks of it." She held his eyes. "You were saying you wanted to speak with me." He turned his hat in his hands. It was a gesture she recognized he always did, that when he was uncomfortable, and he had never once realized he did it. She had never told him. "I received a communication from the Richmond assessor," he said. He's found some irregularities in the accounts, in the equipment inventory." Charlotte said nothing. "He believes that the records going back approximately 4 years may have been altered," Nathaniel said. He said the word like it tasted wrong in his mouth. "That there may have been money removed from the estate accounts in ways that were designed to look like legitimate expenses." "That's a serious finding," Charlotte said. "Yes." He looked at her directly. "Charlotte, was the communication to the assessor? Was that from you?" She held his gaze. "Why would you think it was from me?" "Because," he said slowly, "in 14 years of knowing you, I have never met anyone else who would have noticed what was apparently there to notice. And because the information he received was specific in ways that required—" He stopped. "It required someone who understood the estate, who knew what the numbers should look like." Charlotte let the silence sit for a moment. "What are you going to do?" she said. "About Caldwell." Something moved through his face, surprised that she'd used the name, then something else. Something that looked like the beginning of a reckoning. "I confronted him this morning," Nathaniel said. Charlotte went very still. "He denied it," Nathaniel continued, "but the assessor had documentation I hadn't seen, records Caldwell had kept separate from the main accounts, which the assessor found when he expanded his review. It's Charlotte. It goes back further than 4 years. The assessor thinks perhaps 5, perhaps 6. 6 years. Almost the entirety of Caldwell's time on the estate. He's been taking money, Nathaniel said, and the way he said it flat. Disbelieving like a man still in the process of understanding something, his mind kept refusing, told her that this was still new to him. Still raw. Consistently, carefully, in amounts small enough that... He stopped. In amounts small enough that no one noticed. "I noticed," Charlotte said quietly. "I saw the beginning of it. I just didn't..." She stopped herself. She hadn't been going to say that. She hadn't planned to say that in this conversation. Nathaniel looked at her. "You saw it," he said. "I saw something that worried me," she said. "In the 4th year. But I didn't have enough information to be certain, and by the time I did, I no longer had access to the accounts." He stared at her. She watched the understanding move through him. Watched him work out the timeline. The year Caldwell had taken over the accounts. The year Charlotte had stopped being able to check his work. "He waited," Nathaniel said slowly. "He waited until you weren't watching." "Yes," Charlotte said. The word hung between them like something physical. Nathaniel sat down on the edge of the ridge. Not gracefully, he simply sat like a man whose legs had stopped cooperating. He set his hat on his knee and stared at the ground. Charlotte waited. "How bad is it?" she said, because she needed to know, and because he was clearly not going to get there on his own. "Bad," he said. "Not ruinous, not yet. But the assessor says if it had continued another 2 seasons..." He rubbed his face with one hand. "And the water channels, the maintenance problems. Charlotte, the South Field is going to come in badly again next year if I can't fix the drainage before spring, and I don't..." He stopped. "You don't know how," Charlotte said. He looked up at her, and she had expected something. Defensiveness, maybe. Pride. The particular armor men like Nathaniel put on when they've been caught not knowing something. Instead, he just looked tired. "You managed that for years," he said. "I didn't ask you how. I didn't ask you anything about it. It worked, and I didn't think about why." Charlotte picked up her measuring line from the ground. She held it in her hands without doing anything with it, just something to hold. "The channels need clearing before the ground freezes," she said. "The main intake first, then the secondary lines in the south section. There's a particular blockage point at the junction of the 2 old stone ditches. Your father built those ditches, and the joint was never quite right. I packed it with river clay every spring. If Caldwell hasn't done it, the gap will have widened." Nathaniel was listening with an intensity that was almost painful to watch. Like a man trying to drink water after a very long thirst and being frightened by how thirsty he was. "Charlotte," he said. "I'll write it down," she said. "The process. All of it. Every maintenance task, every seasonal requirement, every system on that property that needs attention. And when." She kept her voice even. "Not because it's my responsibility anymore, but because the people who work those fields deserve to have it done correctly. And you need the information." "Why?" he said. "Why would you do that?" She looked at him. "Because I understand it," she said. "That's reason enough." He was quiet for a long moment. Then very quietly he said, "I'm sorry, Charlotte." She did not answer immediately. The wind moved through the October air, carrying the smell of turned earth and cold coming in from the north. Behind her, James's tools rang steadily against rock. The world did not stop for the apology which Charlotte thought was probably appropriate. "I know you are," she finally said. "That's not enough," he said. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He nodded like she'd confirmed something he already knew. He stood up. He put his hat back on. He was going to say something else, she could see it the way his mouth opened, and then he closed it again. "I'll expect the letter," he said. "About the maintenance." "You'll have it by Friday," she said. He walked back up to the road. He mounted his horse. He paused for a moment, looking back at the ridge, at the work happening, at what she was doing with the land everyone had dismissed. Then he rode back toward the estate without another word. Charlotte stood very still after he left. James came up beside her. He didn't say anything. He had the tact of someone who understood what he had just witnessed without needing it explained to him. "We're close," he said. Just that. Redirecting, giving her something practical. She looked at the ridge, at the disturbed earth, at the depth of the work they'd done. "How close?" she said. "Another 2 feet of clay, maybe 3, he said. "Then we hit the rock layer, and if your father's map is right—" "His map is right," Charlotte said. James nodded. "Then maybe another week, maybe less." She breathed in. She breathed out. "Then let's not waste time," she said. Mad. Caldwell came to see her on Thursday. She had been expecting him, so she was not surprised. She had been expecting him since the morning in the market when their eyes had met across the street, since the moment she had understood. He knew the assessor had new information. She had made certain she was never alone in those days. James was always within calling distance. Eleanor had been coming by daily, and Henry Miller had taken to stopping in on his way back from his own fields in the late afternoon, which Charlotte strongly suspected was not coincidental and was deeply grateful for. So when Caldwell rode up to the cottage door on a Thursday evening, James was still there finishing up the day's record-keeping at Charlotte's kitchen table, and she opened the door with that knowledge firm in her mind. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. He looked different than he had on his horse 2 months ago. Less composed. The careful, managed quality that had always characterized him, the quality of a man who had spent years performing trustworthiness, had developed cracks at the edges. His eyes moved past her into the cottage, registered James at the table, and came back to her face. "Mrs. Bennet," he said, "I wonder if we might speak privately." "I'm afraid I'm occupied this evening," Charlotte said pleasantly. "James and I are reviewing the week's survey results. Perhaps another time." His jaw tightened. "It's important." "I imagine it is," she said. "Most things feel important when they're urgent." She kept her expression open and calm. "If you have something to say to me, Mr. Caldwell, you're welcome to say it. James's family." He wasn't. He was an employee who had become something like a younger brother. But that was none of Caldwell's business. Caldwell looked at James again. James looked back at him with the particular blankness of a young man who has been told to be present and is taking that instruction seriously. Caldwell looked back at Charlotte. "I know you spoke to the assessor," he said. Low, direct. The performance of good manners had dropped completely. "Did you?" Charlotte said. "Whatever you told him, whatever you think you know about how the estate has been managed." "I told him what I knew," Charlotte said, "which was considerable. 7 years is a long time to know a property, Mr. Caldwell." "You don't have proof." "The assessor has proof," Charlotte said. "The separate account ledgers were rather conclusive from what I understand." She watched the color leave his face. "I didn't know about those, if you're wondering. I gave him the information I had, and he found the rest himself." Caldwell stared at her. "You've destroyed me," he said. Charlotte looked at him steadily. "You destroyed yourself," she said. "Carefully. Over 6 years. In amounts small enough that you thought nobody would notice." She held his gaze. "You were almost right." Something moved through his face that was ugly and frightened and angry all at once. "If you think this makes Nathaniel grateful, if you think this gets you anything back, I think," Charlotte said, "that the families in this county deserve to have the land they depend on managed honestly. I think the workers on that estate deserve to be employed by someone who isn't stealing from their livelihoods. And I think the truth tends to have value regardless of what anyone gets from it." She stepped back from the doorway, not retreating, concluding, "Good night, Mr. Caldwell. I'd suggest speaking with your own counsel before you speak with anyone else." She closed the door. She stood on the other side of it and listened to his horse leave. Behind her, James said quietly, "He's going to make trouble." "He's going to try," Charlotte said. She turned. "Make sure Henry Miller knows he came here, and Eleanor. I want people to know what he said." "You're building witnesses," James said. "I'm protecting myself," Charlotte said. "There's no honor in being naive." James nodded slowly. Then, with the timing that she had come to recognize as one of his better qualities, he said, "I think we're less than a week out on the ridge, maybe 4 days." Charlotte sat down. 4 days. She pressed her hands on the table and felt something in her chest that was big and complicated. Not triumph exactly, not yet, but the anticipation of something she had been working toward for months. The way a sound builds before it arrives, the pressure of it in the air. 4 days, she said. Maybe less, he said. The clay thinned out this afternoon, significantly. She looked at her father's survey book. At the page she had read so many times she could have reproduced it from memory. Then tomorrow we go early, she said. The twist nobody expected came the following morning. It came from Victoria Ashford. Charlotte was pulling on her coat in the early dark, the kind of cold that had started arriving in mid-October, and promised worse ahead when she heard the knock at the cottage door. A light knock, uncertain. She opened the door and stood very still for a moment. Victoria was standing on the step. She was wearing a traveling cloak, and her hair was less perfectly arranged than Charlotte had ever seen it. She looked younger than she looked at the dinner, which was strange because she also looked worse tired around the eyes, something pinched at the corners of her mouth that hadn't been there before. Charlotte's first instinct was to close the door. Her second instinct won. "Miss Ashford," she said. "Mrs. Bennet?" Victoria's voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of something being held together carefully. "I know you have no reason to speak with me. I know I'm the last person you want to see at your door." "You're not entirely wrong," Charlotte said. "But you're here, so come in." Victoria came in. She sat where Eleanor always sat. She looked at the survey book on the table, at the practical clutter of a working woman's home, and something moved across her face that Charlotte couldn't quite name. "I came to tell you something," Victoria said, "before it gets out on its own, which it will." Charlotte sat across from her. She did not offer tea. She waited. "Nathaniel and I—" Victoria stopped. "The arrangement between us. It isn't—" Another stop. She pressed her lips together. "He told me about Caldwell, about what the assessor found, about how serious the situation is with the estate finances." She looked at her hands. "And he told me that he had spoken with you, and that you had offered to help, with the maintenance information." "I did," Charlotte said. Victoria looked up. "Why?" Charlotte held her gaze. "I already answered that question once today. To someone less entitled to the answer than you are." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I came," she said slowly, "because I think you should know Nathaniel is not the man I believed him to be. When things were comfortable, he was—" She paused. "He was charming. He was certain. He made me feel safe, and I had been in need of safety for a long time." Something in her voice had dropped its performance entirely. She was speaking plainly, which Charlotte had not expected. "But when things became difficult, when the estate problems became real and the weight of it became real, he is not a man who handles difficulty with his best qualities." Charlotte said nothing. "I'm not asking for your sympathy," Victoria said. "I'm not asking for anything from you, which I understand is considerable, given that I am living in your house." She met Charlotte's eyes. "I came because I think you deserve to know that I understand. I understand now in a way I didn't, at that dinner, what it was that he set aside when he set you aside. And I'm sorry. That's inadequate. I know that's inadequate." The cottage was very quiet. Charlotte looked at this woman, 26 years old, beautiful in the particular way that had made her a target, as much as an advantage, her whole life sitting in a cottage she had not expected to be sitting in, and saying things she had clearly not found easy to say. She thought about what it took to come here. She did not forgive Victoria Ashford. That was not what this moment required or deserved. Forgiveness was a process, and it was Charlotte's to manage on her own timeline. But she looked at her, and saw a woman who was more complicated than the role she'd played at that dinner, and less villainous and more frightened, and very much in a situation that was not entirely of her own making. "What are you going to do?" Charlotte asked. "I'm going to my cousin's home in Richmond," Victoria said. "I'm leaving today. I've already arranged it." She stood. "I told Nathaniel this morning. He wasn't—" She stopped. "He wasn't kind about it." Charlotte stood as well. "Miss Ashford," she said, "the house is legally yours. The transfer was completed. Whatever happens between you and Nathaniel, your legal situation should be addressed by counsel before you make any permanent decisions." Victoria stared at her. "I'm not telling you to stay," Charlotte said. "I'm telling you not to leave yourself without recourse because you made a hasty decision while you were upset." A long pause. "Why are you telling me this?" Victoria said. Charlotte picked up her coat. She had a ridge to get to. "Because knowing the right thing to do and having someone tell you aren't the same," she said. "And I had a father who told me, and I've always been grateful for it." She held the door open. "Safe travels, Miss Ashford." Victoria left. Charlotte stood in the open doorway for a moment, breathing the cold morning air. Then she put on her coat and walked to the ridge. It happened at 9:30 in the morning. James hit the rock layer at 7 feet shallower than the survey had estimated, which was the first good sign. Charlotte was beside him, checking her father's book open in her hands to the page she knew by heart. The Miller boys were on the other side of the excavation, working their section, and the sound of tools had taken on the particular ringing quality that meant they were through the clay entirely. Then James stopped. He crouched down. He pressed his hand against the rock surface. He looked up at Charlotte. "It's wet," he said. She crouched beside him. She pressed her own hand to the rock. Cold, unmistakable moisture seeping up through a natural fracture in the stone, thin as a hairline, but present. Real. Exactly where her father had said it would be. She did not cry. She wanted to. The feeling that moved through her was enormous and complicated, and had her father's face in it, and 7 years of marriage and loss, and 2 months of hard work and uncertainty, and the particular sweetness of being right about something nobody believed in. It was all of that at once pressing against the inside of her chest, like the water pressing through the rock, patient, unstoppable, finding the crack. She did not cry. She pressed her hand flat against the wet stone, and she breathed. James was watching her. "Mrs. Bennet," he said quietly. "We found it." "We found it," she said. The eldest Miller boy let out a whoop from the other side of the excavation that sent birds up from the trees 20 yards away. His brothers joined him. James grinned the grin of someone who had spent weeks hauling clay and was now being told it was worth it. Charlotte sat back on her heels with her hand still on the rock, and she let herself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. She counted. 30 seconds of pure, uncomplicated feeling. Something close to joy, something close to grief, something that was entirely and specifically her own. Then she stood up. "All right," she said. "James, I need you to fetch Henry Miller before you do anything else, and then I need someone to ride to the county land office and confirm the water rights documentation we filed last month is properly recorded." She looked at her notes. "And we need to start thinking about the containment structure. My father's survey has recommendations, but we'll need an engineer to review them before we build anything permanent." James was already moving. The Miller boy who had whooped was now looking at her with an expression of concentrated attention that she recognized as the expression of someone who understood they were in the presence of a person who knew what they were doing. "What can we do?" he said. "Take measurements," she said. "Exactly as I showed you. I want this documented before we do anything else. If someone challenges the water rights later, I want a record of the discovery that's better than anything they could argue against." He nodded and got to work. Charlotte stood at the edge of the excavation, with the morning cold around her, and the sound of work resuming, and the knowledge, the clean, certain, irreversible knowledge, that the water was there. That her father had been right. That she had been right to hold on to it, to protect it, to bring it forward when the time was correct. She thought about the spring and what it meant. Not just for her land, for the Miller farm, for the Garfields, for every farm in the county that sat above the same underground system and had been struggling through the dry summer without knowing what was underneath them. She thought about the Bennett estate, about the South Fields and the water channels that needed clearing, about the source of that channel water which her father's surveys had traced, clearly traced to the same underground system that fed this spring. The same water, the same source. The land Nathaniel had given away to get rid of her was the most important piece of property in the county. She had known that since her first year of marriage. She had held the knowledge close through all of it because some part of her had understood even before she could have articulated it that the day would come when it mattered. When the value of knowing something no one else knew would be the difference between being dismissed and being necessary. That day was here, and she had not used it for revenge. She had used it for this. Baba. Henry Miller arrived within the hour. He stood at the edge of the excavation and looked at the wet rock and said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at Charlotte. "Your father," he said. "He walked this land himself." 40 years ago, Charlotte said. "Before I was born. He came back twice more to confirm the readings." Henry was quiet again. "And you've known since my first year at the estate," she said. "I've known it was here and that it connected to the estate's water system and what that meant." Henry looked at her with the expression of a man recalculating something. "Charlotte," he said, "do you understand what this means for Nathaniel?" "For the estate?" "Yes," she said. "He just lost his estate manager to fraud charges. His accounts are in disarray. His harvest has been failing." Henry paused. "And the solution to the core of his problem, the water supply issue that's been underlying the agricultural failure for years, is sitting on land he gave away." "I'm aware," Charlotte said. "What are you going to do?" She looked at the spring, at the water seeping through the rock, cold and clear and patient as time itself. She had spent 2 months thinking about what she was going to do. She had been thinking about it since the morning she walked out of the Bennett estate with a candle and a trunk and her father's survey book. She was going to do what she had always done. She was going to take care of it. But on her terms this time. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's household manager, unnamed and uncredited and replaceable the moment a younger woman walked into the room. As the person who found it, who understood it, who had held the knowledge of it safe through 7 years of marriage and 2 months of abandonment and 1 confrontation with a frightened fraudster and 1 unexpected dawn visit from a woman in a traveling cloak who had apologized without being asked. As herself, "I'm going to manage the spring," she said, "under a formal arrangement with every farm that uses the water. Legal documented fair." She looked at Henry. "Including the Bennett estate." Henry's eyebrows rose. "You'd offer Nathaniel access." "I'd offer the estate access," Charlotte said carefully. "The way I'd offer anyone in this county access, on the same terms, no more generous and no less." Henry looked at her for a long moment. "He hurt you badly," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "And you'd still—" "It's not about him," Charlotte said. "I keep having to explain that to people, and I don't entirely blame them for not understanding it because it feels like it should be about him, but it isn't. It's about the land. It's about the water. It's about the 30 families in this county who depend on an agricultural system that needs this spring to function." She met Henry's eyes. "I can't let the land suffer because I'm angry. My father would never have forgiven me for that." Henry Miller, who had been farming this county for 40 years and had seen more of human nature than most men twice his age, looked at Charlotte Ashby. Bennett standing at the edge of the spring her father had found and she had protected. And he said very quietly, "Lord, he raised a remarkable woman." Charlotte felt the words in her chest like something warm. "He did his best," she said. She looked at the spring one more time. Then she turned back to the work, because there was so much of it still to do. There always was. That was the thing nobody told you about being right. It didn't end the work. It just changed what you were working toward. And Charlotte Bennett had never been afraid of work. She had only ever been afraid of running out of things worth working for. She wasn't afraid of that anymore. The water rights documentation was filed on a Thursday morning in late October, and by Thursday afternoon the entire county knew about it. Charlotte had not planned for it to move that fast. She had planned for careful and deliberate, the kind of information management her father had always recommended when dealing with something significant. Don't announce. Don't perform. Let the facts speak, and let them speak clearly, and let people arrive at their own understanding in their own time. But the county land office had its own rhythms, and those rhythms included the particular efficiency with which a clerk named Samuel Hodge communicated interesting developments to his brother-in-law, who ran the dry goods store 2 doors down, who was married to the woman who organized the Methodist Women's Circle. And by Thursday evening, there were people in this county who knew about the Bennett Spring who had no practical reason to know about it at all. Charlotte found out when Eleanor arrived at the cottage door at 5:30, with the expression of someone carrying news that was too large for a normal face. "It's out," Eleanor said. Charlotte set down the engineering notes she'd been reviewing. "How far out?" "Far." Eleanor came in and sat down with the weight of a woman who had been moving quickly. "The Harpers know. The Pattersons. I heard it from Dolores Croft at the store, and Dolores heard it from 3 separate people, which means it's gone in every direction at once." "What are they saying?" Eleanor looked at her carefully. "They're saying Charlotte Bennett found water on the land her husband threw her out on. They're saying it's the same source that feeds the Bennett estate, and they're saying—" She paused. "They're saying it makes the land she was given worth more than the main estate itself." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "That's not precisely accurate," she said. "The spring isn't worth more than the estate. The spring and the estate together are worth considerably more than either is separately. That's the whole point." "Charlotte," Eleanor said gently, "that's not the story people are telling." "I know," Charlotte said. "What story are they telling?" Eleanor folded her hands. "They're saying Nathaniel Bennett gave away the most valuable piece of land in the county to get rid of his wife, and his wife turned it into something that could save him, and the only question now is whether he's too proud to ask her for help." Charlotte looked at the ceiling. "Lord," she said quietly. "There's more," Eleanor said. Charlotte looked at her. "Caldwell is gone," Eleanor said. "He left this morning, packed what he could carry, and rode out before dawn. The assessor has documentation enough to pursue a case against him, but without Caldwell present, the legal process will take time. And in the meantime—" Eleanor stopped. "In the meantime, the Bennett estate has no manager, no functional account system, drainage problems in the South Fields that aren't getting better, a harvest already below projection, and Nathaniel is attempting to run the whole operation himself." Charlotte pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. "He can't run it himself," she said. "He cannot run it himself," Eleanor confirmed. "He doesn't know enough. And the workers know he doesn't know enough, which means the workers who have better options are beginning to consider them." "Who's left?" "The older men. The ones who've been on that land long enough that they're loyal to the land itself, not to whoever owns it." "But Charlotte—" Eleanor leaned forward. "If he doesn't stabilize things before the first hard freeze, he's going to lose the spring planting season entirely. And if he loses the spring planting season on top of 2 bad harvests—" "He loses the estate," Charlotte said. Eleanor nodded. The cottage was very quiet. Charlotte got up and walked to the window. She stood there looking out at nothing particular, which was her habit when she was thinking through something she didn't want to think through. She had known this was coming. She had known it the way you know weather is coming, not the exact hour, but the feeling in the air, the particular quality of the light. She had been watching the pieces move toward this configuration for weeks, and some part of her had hoped the timing would be different. That she would have more established before the crisis on the estate forced the question. The spring was found. The documentation was filed. The water access arrangements with the Miller family and the Garfields were in place. Those were solid. Those were real. But the containment structure wasn't built yet. The engineer she'd corresponded with in Richmond hadn't visited yet. The full capacity of the spring wasn't determined yet. She wasn't ready. And Nathaniel was running out of time. "Eleanor," she said without turning from the window. "Am I being foolish if I go to him?" "No," Eleanor said immediately. "Am I letting him off too easily?" A pause, more honest. "I don't know," Eleanor said. "I think that depends on what you want from it. If you want him to suffer first to fully understand what he lost before you help him, then yes, maybe the timing is too soon. But if what you want is for the land to be whole and the people on it to be cared for." She stopped. "Then the timing is the timing, Charlotte. It doesn't care about what's fair." Charlotte turned from the window. "I'm not going to him," she said. Eleanor blinked. "He comes to me," Charlotte said. "And not to ask for help with the maintenance schedule, not to consult about the water channels, not to use my knowledge the way he's always used my knowledge invisibly, without acknowledgement, as though it simply appeared without anyone doing the work to develop it." She met Eleanor's eyes. "He comes to me when he's ready to actually see what he's looking at, and not a moment before." Eleanor studied her for a long moment. "And if he's too proud," Eleanor said. "Then he loses the estate," Charlotte said simply. "And I manage the spring and the county farms have water, and the Bennett estate gets its access on the same terms as everyone else, and Nathaniel Bennett lives with the consequence of his pride." She sat back down. "I will not chase a man who has already walked away from me once. Not for the land, not for anyone." Eleanor was quiet. Then she said, "Good." Charlotte looked at her. "That's the right answer," Eleanor said firmly. "And I will tell you one more thing the whole county is watching, and what they see in the next few weeks will be what they remember about Charlotte Ashby Bennett for the rest of your life. You understand that?" "I understand that," Charlotte said. "Then be exactly who you are," Eleanor said. "Not harder and not softer, just exactly who you are." Charlotte nodded. She picked up the engineering notes. She went back to work. Nathaniel came on a Sunday, 6 days after the news broke. 6 days of Charlotte working steadily, meeting with the engineer who had ridden up from Richmond to assess the spring containment, finalizing the water access terms with 3 more families, and hearing through Eleanor and Henry and the general ambient communication of a small county exactly how badly things were deteriorating at the Bennett estate. The field workers were restless. 2 of the older men had gone to Nathaniel directly and told him what the channels needed, and he had listened and said he would handle it, and then not handled it because he didn't know how and didn't ask anyone who did. And the workers were now in the particular helpless frustration of people who could see a problem clearly and couldn't get the person responsible to fix it. The accounts were a disaster. Without Caldwell's system corrupt as it was, nobody knew what money was owed to whom, what contracts were outstanding, what suppliers were waiting for payment. Nathaniel had been attempting to reconstruct it from memory and incomplete records, and the results were not good. And Victoria Ashford, according to the letter her Richmond cousin had apparently sent to someone in the county, had consulted with a lawyer, which meant the estate's legal status was also in question. So when Charlotte heard hooves on the road on Sunday morning and looked out the window and saw Nathaniel dismounting alone, she felt something that was not satisfaction and was not pity and was not love, or not only those things. It was something more complicated. The feeling of watching a person arrive at the place they needed to arrive at, and understanding that arriving there had cost them something, and not being entirely sure how to feel about that cost. She opened the door before he knocked. He looked at her. She looked at him. He had aged in 6 days in ways that 6 days shouldn't produce. Not dramatically, but in the set of his shoulders and something around his eyes that had been replaced by something more like honesty. "May I come in?" he said. "Come in," she said. He came in. He stood in her kitchen for a moment, looking at it, at the survey book on the table, at the engineer's notes, at the organized practical evidence of a woman who had been working steadily and well, and something moved through his face that she recognized eventually as shame. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She sat across from him. He turned his hat in his hands. She let him. She did not rescue him from the silence. He said finally, "I need to ask you something." "I know," she said. "It's not just about the maintenance," he said. "I need Charlotte. I need to understand the whole of it. The water system, the accounts, the management structure. I need someone to walk me through how this estate has actually been functioning, because I have sat in that house for 7 years, believing that things were working because I was in charge of them, and I have spent the last 6 days discovering that I was wrong about almost everything I thought I understood. Charlotte was very still. Not almost everything, she said carefully. The land itself is sound. The fundamental operation of the estate is sound. What's been damaged is specific Caldwell's theft, the maintenance that was skipped the account records. Those are serious, but they're not irreparable. Can they be repaired? He said. Yes, she said. With work, with the right information, and with... She paused. With water. He looked at her. The spring, she said. The water supply issue that's been underlying 3 years of declining harvests isn't just about the channel maintenance. The underground water system that your estate depends on has been under pressure from the dry seasons. The spring on this land is connected to that system. If it's managed correctly, it stabilizes the water table across the whole eastern section of the property. She held his gaze. But I want to be direct with you, Nathaniel. The spring is mine. The land is mine. The water access arrangement I'm offering to every farm in this county, including yours, is the same arrangement. No preferential terms. No special consideration because of our history. Something moved through his face. I wouldn't ask for that, he said. Wouldn't you? She said quietly. He was silent. 7 years ago, you asked me to manage your household, and I did, Charlotte said. I managed it better than you knew, and better than you ever acknowledged. I understood your land. I understood your finances. I understood the systems that made that estate function, and I ran them. And when they ran well, you believed it was because you were a good landowner, and when I tried to tell you things you didn't want to hear, you found other things to look at. She kept her voice steady. Not angry, she was past the anger, or past the sharpest edge of it. You gave this land to get rid of me. You gave it as the lesser thing, the discarded thing. I know, he said. I need you to understand what that meant, she said. Not for my sake, I've already moved through most of it. For yours, because if you don't understand it, you'll do it again. To someone else, or in some other form. You'll find another way to make someone invisible because acknowledging them fully is more complicated than you want to deal with. Nathaniel looked at his hands. I know, he said again. That's not Charlotte. I'm not here to argue it. I'm not here to defend myself. I know what I did. Do you? He looked up. I gave away my home, he said. Not this cottage, not this piece of land. I gave away my home, the actual home, the one that had been lived in and understood and cared for, because I couldn't see past the walls to what was inside them. Charlotte held his gaze. That was closer. That was considerably closer to the thing she had needed to hear, and she hadn't expected it this soon, and she was honest enough with herself to admit that it moved something in her. The Southfield channels, she said. They need to be cleared before the ground freezes. I can write out the process, but you'll need the workers who know that section of the property to execute it, the 2 men named Robert and Old Tom who've been on that land the longest. They know where the problem areas are. They need to know that you trust their judgment. I'll talk to them, Nathaniel said. Today, Charlotte said. Today. He agreed. And the accounts. She reached for a piece of paper and her pen. The first thing you need to do is establish a clean baseline. Contact the Richmond assessor, ask him to help you reconstruct from the legitimate records what the estate's actual financial position is, separate from everything Caldwell touched. It will take time, but it's the only way to know what you're actually working with. He's already offered to help with that, Nathaniel said. When I met with him last week. Good. Take him up on it before the offer changes. She wrote as she talked. And hire someone local for the interim management, not from outside the county. Someone who knows this land. Henry Miller's second son is looking for work, and he's smart and honest. I'd recommend him. Nathaniel was watching her. She looked up. What? She said. You've been planning this, he said. Not to hurt me. You've been planning how to fix it. I've been planning how to fix the land, she said. You're part of the land situation. That makes you part of the plan. He was quiet for a moment. Charlotte, he said. Victoria is... I know, she said. Eleanor told me. The legal situation with the transfer deed. That's between you and Victoria and your respective lawyers, Charlotte said firmly. I'm not part of that conversation. I don't want to be part of that conversation. Whatever happens with the main estate legally is not my concern. But if Victoria contests the transfer, the deed could be Nathaniel. She set the pen down. I signed that deed. Whatever my reasons, I signed it. I'm not going to try to recover property through Victoria's legal difficulties. If the deed is contested and the estate's ownership changes, that's a matter for the courts. I will not benefit from it. He stared at her. You'd let her. I'm not letting anyone do anything, Charlotte said. I'm managing what is mine and leaving what isn't mine to the people who own it. She held his gaze. That's what I should have been doing 7 years ago. I got confused somewhere along the way about what was mine and what I was just taking care of for someone else. I'm not confused about that anymore. Something in his face shifted at that. Something cracked slightly, not dramatically, not in the way of performance. Just a small, real fracture. I did that to you, he said. You contributed to it, she said honestly. I also contributed to it. I should have insisted on clearer boundaries. I should have put my name on things. I should have said more than once, this is my work, and it deserves to be seen as my work. She paused. I didn't. I thought doing the work was enough. I was wrong about that. He nodded slowly. The cottage was very quiet for a moment. Then Charlotte said, Are you eating? He blinked. What? You look like you haven't been eating properly, she said. You have the look of a man who has been so consumed with a crisis that he's forgetting the basic things. He almost smiled. It was startled out of him the instinctive response to something familiar, something that remembered itself before his pride could stop it. It hasn't been a priority, he said. It needs to be a priority, she said. You can't manage a crisis on an empty stomach. That's not practical. She got up and went to the kitchen section of the cottage and put the kettle on, and the mundaneness of it, the absolute ordinary domestic reality of it, felt more significant than anything else that had happened in this conversation. He watched her. Charlotte, he said quietly. She said, not turning around. I'm not asking you to come back, he said. I want to be clear about that. I know that's not something I have any right to ask. Not now, not like this. She turned and looked at him. Good, she said, because I wouldn't have an answer for you if you did. He held her gaze. But I want you to know, and I know this is also not something I have a right to say, I want you to know that I understand now what I didn't understand then. Not just about the land. About you. About what you are and what you were doing and what I chose not to see, because seeing it would have required me to think differently about myself. Charlotte set the cups down. She thought about the man who had sat with her in the library in the first winter of their marriage and asked about her father's surveys. She thought about the man who had laughed with relief when the blight remediation worked. She thought about the years between then and the dining room in August and the slow erosion of something that had once been real. I believe you, she said. He exhaled. That doesn't resolve anything, she added. I know, he said, but it's a start, she said. Of something. I don't know what yet. She set the tea on the table. She sat down across from him. And for the first time, in a very long time, they were simply two people in a room together, with no performance between them, and no audience, and no pretense, just the truth of what had happened, and the uncertain shape of what might come next. The engineer's report arrived the following Tuesday. Charlotte read it twice standing at her kitchen table in the early morning before James arrived, and by the time she set it down, she was steadier than she had been in weeks. The spring was larger than her father's survey had estimated. The water capacity properly contained and managed could support nearly twice the acreage she had initially projected. The containment structure the engineer recommended was buildable within her budget with the Miller family's labor contribution factored in and could be operational before spring planting if they moved quickly. This was not small. This was the kind of thing that changed the shape of a life. She sat down and she let herself feel the full size of it for a moment. Not the anxiety, not the responsibility, just the sheer reality of what she had done. What her father had started, and she had continued, and the land had finally answered. Then James knocked and came in, and she handed him the report, and they got to work. The next 2 weeks moved fast. Construction on the containment structure began. Henry Miller's family worked beside James and his cousins with the particular efficiency of people who understood that they were building something that would outlast them. 2 other county families joined the project, contributing labor in exchange for confirmed water access agreements, and Charlotte kept every agreement documented, witnessed, filed with the county land office before the ink was dry. At the Bennett estate, things moved differently, slower, more painfully, with the particular difficulty of a system trying to repair itself from the inside. But they moved. Robert and Old Tom cleared the Southfield channels. Charlotte had written the process out in clear, plain language, and Nathaniel had given it to them with the instruction to do it exactly as described, and tell him what they found, and they had looked at him with the careful assessment of men deciding whether to trust, and apparently decided that this particular Nathaniel Bennett was different enough from the one they'd been working around for the past year that they'd give him the benefit of one attempt. The channels, once cleared, began showing improved water flow within days. Not dramatically, not enough to fix the accumulated damage from 3 years of neglect, but measurably, verifiably better in ways that Old Tom confirmed with the authority of a man who had been watching that water flow for 20 years and knew exactly what different looked like. When Charlotte heard that from Eleanor, she felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not her relief. Not the relief of being vindicated or proven right. Just straightforward human relief that the land was going to be better. That the Southfields were going to get their water. That the system was going to function the way a system should function when it's understood and cared for. She thought about what that said about her. She thought about what Eleanor had said. Be exactly who you are, and decided that being someone who felt relief when damaged land was healed, regardless of who that land belonged to, was probably exactly who she was. She could live with that. The first real test came on a Wednesday in early November. Charlotte was at the construction site. The containment structure was at its most critical phase. The stonework that would form the main basin, and she wanted to be present for it when she heard a horse on the road and looked up and saw a man she didn't recognize. He was well dressed, Richmond by the look of him. He carried himself with the particular confidence of someone who was accustomed to his presence mattering in whatever room he entered. He rode up to the edge of the site. "Is this the Bennett Spring property?" he said. "It is," Charlotte said. She did not drop what she was doing. She looked at him steadily from the worksite. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Mrs. Charlotte Bennett," he said. "You've found her." He looked at her and the work clothes, at the practical situation of a woman actively supervising a construction project, and his expression made a small, involuntary recalculation. "Ma'am," he said, adjusting. "My name is George Harwick. I represent a group of investors from Richmond who have become aware of the discovery on this property. We're interested in discussing an acquisition." Charlotte set down her measuring tool. She looked at him carefully. "An acquisition," she said. "Of the water rights," he said. "Potentially the property itself. We believe the commercial potential of this water source is considerable, and we're prepared to make a substantial offer." Charlotte said nothing for a moment. She thought about what a substantial offer meant. She thought about what it would feel like to have money in her hand. Real money, Richmond investor money, the kind that came with a number she couldn't earn in 10 years of careful farming. She thought about what she could do with that. The security, the independence, the absolute certainty of never needing to depend on anyone's charity or anyone's quarterly allowance or anyone's estimation of her worth again. She thought about it honestly. Then she thought about the Miller family, about the Garfields, about the 30 other families in this county who sat above this water system and whose livelihoods depended on what happened to it, about what Richmond investors did with water rights, about the difference between managing something and owning it from a distance. "Mr. Harwick," she said, "the spring is not for sale." He blinked. "Perhaps you'd like to hear the offer before." "I don't need to hear the offer," she said. "The spring is not for sale. Not the water rights, not the property, not any portion of either." He recalibrated again. The smooth social machinery of a man used to negotiating reconsidered its approach. "Mrs. Bennet, I understand this may seem sudden. Perhaps if we scheduled a time to discuss it more formally." "I won't change my answer in a more formal setting," she said. "The spring feeds water to a dozen family farms in this county. Those farms have work agreements and water access rights that have been filed with the county land office and are legally documented. I'm not going to sell that access to investors who will set the price at whatever the market bears." She met his eyes without apology. "This water belongs to the land it comes from and the people who live on that land. It isn't a commercial opportunity." Harwick looked at her for a long moment. "You understand you're passing up a considerable sum," he said. "I understand that," she said. "I've made my decision." He looked at the construction site, at the work happening around her, at the documentation she was holding. "I'll tell my principals," he said. "They may reach out directly." "They're welcome to," Charlotte said. "My answer will be the same." He tipped his hat and rode away. James appeared at her elbow. "Richmond investors," he said. "Richmond investors," she confirmed. "They'll be back," he said. "Probably," she said. "Let them come." She picked up her measuring tool. "Get me the stonework calculations. We need to finish the East Basin before the freeze." James went. Charlotte looked at the road where Harwick had been. She thought about the moment she had almost hesitated. The moment when the word substantial had landed, and some part of her had paused. She did not regret the decision, but she was honest enough to remember the pause. The twist she hadn't planned for arrived 3 days later. Not Harwick, not Caldwell, not Nathaniel. It was a letter, from a lawyer in Richmond, addressed to Charlotte Ashby Bennet, formerly of Bennet Estate. She opened it at the kitchen table while Eleanor watched. She read it once. She set it down. She picked it up and read it again. "Charlotte," Eleanor said. "What is it?" Charlotte set the letter on the table and turned it so Eleanor could read it. Eleanor read. She looked up slowly. "Victoria," Eleanor said. "Victoria," Charlotte confirmed. The letter was from Victoria Ashford's lawyer. It stated that Miss Ashford, having reviewed her legal situation with counsel, had made a decision regarding the Bennet Estate transfer deed. That she was filing to have the transfer reversed. Not challenged, reversed. Voluntarily. With a formal statement of her reasoning attached. The statement which the lawyer had included said this: "I accepted property that was used as an instrument of dismissal against a woman who had earned it. I did not earn it. I cannot in conscience keep it." Charlotte stared at the letter for a long time. Eleanor said softly, "She did it." "She did it," Charlotte said. "Did you, when you told her to speak with counsel, did you think she might—" "No," Charlotte said honestly. "I told her to protect herself legally. I didn't expect—" She stopped. She pressed her hand flat on the letter. She didn't have to do this. The deed was legal, signed, filed. She could have kept it. "I know," Eleanor said. "She's giving up a 12-room estate," Charlotte said. "A main house, 40 acres. "I know," Eleanor said again. Charlotte looked at the letter. She thought about the woman who had come to her door in the traveling cloak before dawn, with her hair not perfectly arranged and something real and frightened in her face. Who had apologized without being asked? Who had said, "I understand now what it was that he set aside when he set you aside"? She saw it, Charlotte said quietly. She actually saw it. "Not everyone would have," Eleanor said. "No," Charlotte said. "Not everyone would have." She folded the letter carefully. She sat with it for a long moment, with the knowledge that the legal situation had just shifted in ways she needed to think carefully about, that Nathaniel's situation, and her situation, and the estate's situation, had all just changed simultaneously, and that she needed to handle what came next with the same steadiness she had brought to everything else. Not with haste, not with emotion running ahead of judgment. With her eyes open and her father's voice in her head, and the spring contained and the work documented, and everything she had built in the past 3 months standing solid behind her. She stood up. "I need to talk to Nathaniel," she said. Eleanor nodded. When Charlotte put on her coat, "Now," she said. She rode to the estate herself. No James, no Eleanor. Just Charlotte on the road she had traveled 100 times, arriving at the main house she had managed for 7 years, which now had a different legal status than it had had yesterday, and would have yet another status in the weeks to come. The estate looked not worse than she expected. Better, actually, in the specific ways that mattered. The south field channels had clearly been addressed. The grounds were not pristine, but they were not chaotic. Someone had trimmed back the roses along the front path, trimmed them exactly as she had described in the market, carefully, without cutting too deep. She felt something move through her at that. She knocked at the front door. The young maid who answered new since Charlotte's time looked at her with the uncertainty of someone who didn't know quite what category to put her in. "I need to see Mr. Bennett," Charlotte said. "Please tell him Charlotte Ashby is here." She used her maiden name. Whether Nathaniel noticed that when he came to the door she couldn't tell, but he came quickly, and he looked at her face and said, "What's happened?" She handed him the letter. He read it. He read it again. He looked up. "Charlotte!" "I know," she said. She's giving it back." "She's filing to reverse the transfer," Charlotte said. "Which means the legal situation will take time to sort out. Which means you need your lawyer involved, and the assessor, and probably another conversation with the county land office before anything is settled." He was staring at the letter. "I didn't ask her to do this." "I know," Charlotte said. "Did you—" "I told her to get legal counsel," Charlotte said. "I told her not to make hasty decisions. I didn't tell her to do this." He looked at her. "She did it because of you." Charlotte thought about that. "She did it because of herself," she said. "Because she's more than what she looked like at that dinner. Give her that." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. He looked at the letter one more time. "If the transfer reverses," he said slowly, "if the estate comes back to me legally—" He stopped. "Charlotte, what happens to us? What does this mean for this?" "Nothing," she said. "Not automatically, not by itself." She looked at him steadily. "A deed reversal doesn't undo August. It doesn't undo 7 years of not being seen. It doesn't undo the dinner and the witnesses and the pen you pushed across the table." She paused. "It means the legal situation changes. What we do with that, what either of us does with that, is a separate question." He held her gaze. "What do you want?" he said. "Charlotte, not the spring, not the estate, not the legal situation. What do you want?" The question surprised her. Not because it was a good question, it was an excellent question, but because in 14 years of knowing Nathaniel Bennett, she was not sure he had ever asked it quite that directly, quite that stripped of agenda. She looked at him. She thought about the spring, about the work, about Eleanor and Henry and James, and the families building something together on a piece of land everyone had discarded. About the engineer's report and the containment structure and the water flowing under the ridge. About the man standing in front of her who had asked a question he should have asked years ago and was finally asking it now. "I want," she said slowly, "to be seen. Not thanked, not apologized to, though those things have their place. I want to be seen as someone who knows things worth knowing and does things worth doing and deserves to have that acknowledged while it's happening. Not after." She held his gaze. "I spent 7 years managing things you took credit for. I'm not doing that again. Not for this estate, not for you, not for anyone." "I know," he said. "If that's something you can actually give," she said, "and not just say in this moment because the situation is pressing on you, then we have something to talk about." She paused. "But I need to know the difference, and so do you." Nathaniel looked at her for a long time. "The roses," he said finally. She blinked. "I trimmed them myself," he said. "The way you said. I went out there the morning after I came to the cottage, and I did it myself." He paused. "Not because I knew how. I didn't know how. I had to try 3 times before I got it right, and I probably still didn't get it entirely right. But I did it myself because—" He stopped. "Because I wanted to understand one thing that you understood. One specific real thing. Even if it was just roses." Charlotte looked at him. The feeling in her chest was complicated and warm and careful all at once. "That's a start," she said. "It was not forgiveness. It was not resolution. It was not the end of anything or the clean beginning of anything. But it was a start." And Charlotte Ashby Bennett, who had learned to build things from the ground up, from bare earth and old surveys, and the patient certainty that water moved through dark places toward the light, knew better than most people that starts were not small things. Starts were everything. You just had to know what to do with them. The freeze came early that year. Not the killing cold, not yet, but the first hard frost that turned the ground silver in the mornings and made the breath visible and reminded every farmer in the county that the window for outdoor work was narrowing fast. Charlotte felt it the morning after she left the Bennett estate, standing outside the cottage before sunrise with her coat pulled close and the cold settling against her face, like a hand pressing gently but firmly against her skin. She had not slept well. Not from grief, not from anger, from the particular restlessness of a woman who has said something true and important, and now has to live in the space after the saying of it, waiting to find out what it meant. I want to be seen, not thanked, not apologized to. Seen. She had meant it. She still meant it. But meaning something and knowing what to do with it were different things, and Charlotte had learned over the past 3 months that she was better at the doing than the waiting. So she did what she always did when the waiting became too loud. She went to work. The containment structure was 3 days from completion. The engineer had returned from Richmond for the final phase, a quiet, methodical man named Calloway, who spoke very little but moved through a work site with the confident precision of someone who had built things that lasted. He and James had developed a working shorthand over the past 2 weeks that Charlotte found satisfying to watch the particular efficiency of 2 people who respected each other's knowledge without needing to discuss it. She arrived at the ridge as the sun was coming up, and Calloway was already there, and he looked at her and said, 3 days. Maybe 2 if the weather holds. The weather will hold, Charlotte said. He looked at the sky. You sound certain. My father taught me to read the sky the same way he taught me to read land, she said. 2 days. Calloway almost smiled. Then 2 days, he said, and went back to work. James arrived an hour later with the Miller boys and 2 men from the Garfield farm, and the work began with the rhythm Charlotte had come to love, purposeful collaborative building towards something real. She moved between the tasks, checking measurements, reviewing the engineer's specifications, making sure every stone was seated correctly. Henry Miller arrived at mid-morning. He stood at the edge of the work and watched for a moment. Then he came to stand beside Charlotte. I heard you went to the estate yesterday, he said. Word travels, she said. It always does. He was quiet for a moment. How is he? Charlotte considered the question honestly. Clearer than he was, she said. About what happened, about what he didn't see. And you? Working, she said. Henry made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Charlotte, I've watched you work every day for 3 months. I know what working looks like on you. What does the rest of it look like? She stopped what she was doing. She looked at Henry Miller, this solid, weathered, honest man who had shown up when she needed him and asked nothing except fairness in return. Scared, she said quietly. If I'm being honest, not of what he'll do, of what I might do, of whether I can trust my own judgment about him, because my judgment about him was wrong for a long time. Henry nodded. He didn't rush to reassure her, which she appreciated. Your judgment about the land was right, he said. Every time. The land doesn't have feelings, she said. No, he said. But you do. And the fact that you're scared means you're taking it seriously. People who aren't scared aren't paying attention. He put his hat back on. Just keep doing what you're doing. The rest will find its shape. He went back to his sons. Charlotte stood for a moment with his words settling around her. Then she picked up the measuring line and kept working. The twist came that afternoon. Not from Nathaniel. Not from Caldwell, who was still absent and presumably dealing with his own legal reality somewhere far from this county. Not from the Richmond investors, who had sent a second inquiry that Charlotte had answered with the same 4 words she'd used the first time: "The spring is not for sale." It came from Robert, old Tom's colleague, one of the longtime Bennett estate workers who had cleared the Southfield channels. He rode up to the construction site on an estate horse, which meant Nathaniel had sent him, and he came to Charlotte with his hat in his hand and the expression of a man delivering news he found personally significant. "Mrs. Bennett," he said. "Robert," she said. "What is it?" "Mr. Bennett asked me to come," he said. "He wanted you to know the Southfield channels are flowing." He paused, and something came into his face that was more than a messenger delivering information. "Fully. Clean water through every line. Old Tom says it's the best flow he's seen in 4 years. Charlotte went very still. 4 years, she said. "Yes, ma'am," Robert said. "He says the pressure is higher than it should be from just clearing the channels. Says it's like something upstream changed." He looked at the ridge, at the construction, at what Charlotte had been building. "He says it feels like the water table's rising." Charlotte understood immediately. The spring. The containment work, even incomplete, even 3 days from operational, had already begun to affect the underground pressure in the system. Her father's survey had described the interconnection. She had understood it theoretically. She had not expected to feel it this fast. "Tell Tom he's right," she said. "And tell him to document the flow rate, write down what he's seeing today with a date. I want records." Robert nodded. He started to go, then turned back. "Ma'am," he said. "The men, me and Tom and the others who've been there a long time, we know what you did. With the assessor, with the drainage information." He looked at her directly. "We know Mr. Bennett wouldn't have known to look without you pointing the way. We wanted you to know that we know." Charlotte held his gaze. "Thank you, Robert," she said. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. And he rode back toward the estate. James appeared at her elbow. "The water table's rising," he said. He had heard. "Faster than I expected," Charlotte said. "Is that a problem?" "It's a gift," she said. "But we need to finish the containment structure before the pressure builds further. If the spring volume increases before we have the basin fully contained..." She was already moving. "Calloway. I need Calloway." She found him at the far end of the site and explained what Robert had said in 30 seconds of direct language. Calloway listened, asked 2 questions, and then said something that made Charlotte's breath catch. "We can finish in 1 day," he said, "if we work through the evening." She looked at the sky. Her father had taught her to read it. "We have light until 6, she said. "And I can get lanterns." "Then 1 day," Calloway said. "Today," she said. He nodded and raised his voice, and the work shifted gears. Not rushed, because rushed work on a containment structure was dangerous work, but faster, more focused, every person on the site understanding what they were working toward. Charlotte worked beside them. She did not supervise from a distance. She lifted stone and held lines and checked measurements and called out corrections and kept moving for 8 hours straight with the cold sharpening around them as the afternoon turned toward evening. Her hands ached. Her back ached. She was 41 years old, and she was building something with her body and her mind simultaneously, and she was completely, utterly alive in a way she had not felt in years. The last stone of the main basin was set at 20 minutes past 5. Calloway packed the final seam. James poured the first water test. They all stood and watched. The basin held. Clean, cold, abundant. The water from the Bennett Spring filled the containment structure with a sound that was simultaneously practical and miraculous, the way genuinely important things tend to be. It rose to the level of the first outflow channel and moved cleanly through the system Charlotte had designed, through the access points for each of the 6 farms that had built agreements through the main channel toward the east section of the county. toward the Bennett estate, toward the Southfield water system that had been running thin for 4 years. Henry Miller made a sound Charlotte had never heard from him before, low and rough and entirely unguarded. His oldest son clapped his brother on the back. James stood with his arms at his sides and his head tilted back and his eyes bright with something he wasn't bothering to hide. Calloway looked at Charlotte. "Your father knew his work," he said. Charlotte pressed her hand against the stone of the basin, cold and solid and real. "He did," she said. She kept her hand there for a long moment. She counted to 30, the way she had at the moment of discovery. 30 seconds of pure, uncomplicated feeling. No analysis. No planning. No next step. Just this. Just what it was. Then she straightened. "Calloway," she said. "I need the completion report filed with the county land office before the end of the week. Every measurement, every access point, every outflow rate. I'll have it to you by Thursday," he said. "Wednesday," she said. He almost smiled again. "Wednesday," he said. She looked at the spring. Then she looked at the road. She had one more thing to do today. Nathaniel was in the south field when she found him. Not in the house, not in the study where he used to manage the estate from a position of comfortable authority. He was in the field, standing at the edge of the main drainage channel with old Tom beside him, and they were both looking at the water running through it with the focused attention of men watching something they had needed to see. He heard her horse and turned. He looked at her face and seemed to understand immediately that something had happened. "It's done," she said. He looked at the channel, at the water running clean and full through the stone. "I can see it," he said. "Tom said 20 minutes ago the flow changed. Just like that." He snapped his fingers. "Like something opened." "Something did," she said. She dismounted. She stood in the field beside him, which was not where she had expected to be standing today, and also felt completely correct. "The containment structure is complete. The spring is fully operational. The outflow is running to all 6 access points." "Including this one," Nathaniel said. "Including this one," she confirmed. "On the same terms as everyone else." He looked at her. "Charlotte, what those terms cost you what you could have made from this if you'd sold to those Richmond investors?" "Isn't something I'm thinking about," she said. "I'm thinking about it," he said. "Then think about it and let it go," she said. "I made my decision. I don't need you to validate it." He was quiet for a moment. Old Tom had walked discreetly further down the channel, which Charlotte appreciated. "The estate accounts are starting to clarify," Nathaniel said. "The assessor has been here 3 days this week. The picture is, it's not good. But it's not ruinous. Caldwell took a significant amount, but the underlying value of the property is..." He stopped. "It's intact, damaged but intact. If the harvest next year is better, if the water problem is solved." "The water problem is solved," Charlotte said. "Then the estate can recover," he said. "I can recover it." He paused. "I want to do it honestly, properly, with people who know what they're doing and get credit for knowing it." He looked at her. "I want to hire Robert and Tom formally, not as laborers, as managers of their sections. I want their names on the operational agreements." Charlotte looked at him. "That's the right decision," she said. "I know it is," he said. "You would have done it 7 years ago." "I would have," she said. He held her gaze. "Teach me to do it right," he said. "Not Charlotte. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking you to manage anything for me. I'm asking you to..." He stopped. Started again. "I'm asking if you would be willing to let me learn. From watching what you do. From asking questions you're willing to answer. From..." He struggled for the word. "From being seen while you do it," Charlotte said. He blinked. "That's what you said you wanted," he said slowly. "To be seen." "Yes," she said. "Then let me see you," he said. "Not use you, not rely on you invisibly. See you. The work, the decisions, the knowledge, all of it with your name on it publicly in ways that can't be undone." He took a breath. I know that's not enough on its own. I know there's a long distance between saying that and living it, but I'm asking for the chance to try. Charlotte stood in the south field of the Bennett estate, with the water running clean beside her, and the cold afternoon light coming across the land she had understood for 7 years. And she thought about what it meant to be asked rather than assumed. To have someone stand in front of you and say, "Let me try," instead of simply taking what they needed. It was different. It mattered that it was different. "I'm not moving back into that house," she said. "I'm not asking you to," he said quickly. "The spring is mine," she said. "The cottage is mine. The water access arrangements I've made with the county families are mine legally and practically, and they don't change regardless of what happens between us." "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said. She looked at him carefully. "Henry Miller's second son. You need a reliable interim manager. I recommended him. Hire him." "I'll talk to him this week," he said. "And the Rose account ledger, I kept a parallel record the whole time I was running the household. I kept it out of habit, and because I don't trust systems, I can't verify myself. It's more complete than anything Caldwell produced, and more accurate than the assessor's reconstruction." She paused. "I'll share it with you, but I want it documented that it came from me. My name, my work, my contribution. Written down somewhere that stays." Nathaniel nodded. "Whatever you want." "Nathaniel," she said, "I'm serious about this. I'm not negotiating. I'm not being difficult. I am telling you exactly what I need. And if you agree to it because you're desperate right now, and forget it when the crisis passes." "I won't forget," he said. "How do I know that?" He was quiet for a moment. "You don't," he said. "Not yet. I know that." He looked at the channel, at the water running through it. "I know I don't have the right to ask you to trust me. I know trust is something I have to build back one real thing at a time, over time, that I can't rush." He met her eyes. "But I'm asking you to let me start, today, whatever that looks like." Charlotte stood very still. She thought about her father, about the surveys he had left her, about the fact that he had spent 40 years walking land and reading it and leaving a record so careful that his daughter could follow it 30 years after he was gone and find exactly what he said she would find. He had believed in building things that lasted. She was his daughter. "Come to the spring site on Saturday," she said. "I'm meeting with all 6 water access families to do the first formal review of the outflow systems. I want you there. As one participant among 6, not as the most important person in the room. As someone who has an access agreement and needs to understand how it works." Nathaniel blinked. "You want me there with the Millers and the Garfields? And the Pattersons and the Wests and the Harfields?" "Yes," Charlotte said. "Sitting at the same table, working through the same system, understanding that the water doesn't care whose name is on the largest deed, it goes where it needs to go because the system was built correctly." She held his gaze. "Can you do that?" He was quiet for a long moment. Something moved through his face that she watched carefully. The instinctive resistance of a man whose entire life had organized itself around a particular understanding of his own position, and then the conscious decision to set that resistance down. "Yes," he said. "Saturday morning," she said. 8 o'clock. "I'll be there," he said. She picked up her horse's reins. "Charlotte," he said. She paused. "The roses," he said. "Along the front path. They look better, since I trimmed them the way you said. They look—" He stopped. "They look like they used to." She looked at him for a moment. "They just needed someone to pay attention to them," she said. "Things usually do." She rode home. Saturday came clear and cold. The kind of November morning that was sharp at the edges and completely honest. No softness, no pretense, just the world as it actually was. Charlotte was at the spring site at 7:30. By 8 o'clock, the Miller family was there, and the Garfields and the Pattersons, who had taken a chance on her in September when she was still a woman with only a survey book and a theory, and the Wests and the Harfields, whose youngest daughter had helped Charlotte move stones for 2 weeks, without being asked, just showing up every morning with her boots on because she believed in what was being built. And Nathaniel. He arrived at 8 o'clock exactly on his chestnut horse alone, and he dismounted and tied his horse and stood at the edge of the gathering with an expression Charlotte recognized as the particular vulnerability of a person learning to be small in a room where they used to be large. Henry Miller looked at him. Then Henry Miller walked over and extended his hand. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "good to see you here." Nathaniel shook it. "Miller," he said, "good to be here." It was not a dramatic moment. It was not meant to be. It was two men in a field acknowledging each other, and the simplicity of it was more powerful than anything more theatrical could have been. Charlotte watched it from across the site. Then she called the meeting to order. She stood at the edge of the spring basin, fully operational, now running clean and cold, and exactly as designed, with her father's survey book under her arm, and 6 months of work in her hands, and 7 years of invisible labor, finally visible. And she spoke clearly and directly to the people who had built this with her. She talked about the outflow rates, about the maintenance schedule, about what each farm needed to monitor and report, about the legal documentation and where every record was filed, and what each family's rights were, and exactly what those rights meant. She did not rush. She did not simplify beyond what was useful. She treated every person at that meeting as someone capable of understanding the full picture because they were, and because they deserved it. Nathaniel sat at the edge of the group and he listened. Not performing listening. Actually listening. She could see it in the way he tracked the information, the way he asked one careful question when the outflow calculation for the estate section came up. The way he wrote something down in a small notebook he had brought unprompted because he had decided to actually learn and not just appear to learn. She noted that. She did not say anything about it, but she noted it. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When it ended, people stood and talked in the way people do when they have built something together and want to stay near it a little longer. The youngest Harfield daughter helped Calloway check the final measurements one more time. Henry Miller and old Tom from the estate stood near the outflow channel, talking about water pressure. In the way two men talked about something they were going to be thinking about for the next 20 years. Charlotte was packing away her notes when Nathaniel appeared at her elbow. She didn't look up. "You have a question," she said. "How did you know I had a question?" he said. "Because you wrote something in your notebook and then looked at me twice," she said. "What is it?" A pause, then quietly. "My father's original land survey, the one from when he built the estate. I think there may be other notes in it. I never understood things that might connect to what your father found. I never knew to look for them." He paused. "Would you if I brought it to you? Would you look at it with me?" Charlotte finally looked up. He was holding his notebook. He had dirt on his coat from the field. His expression was careful and genuine, and completely without the armor he had worn at the dining room table in August. This was the man she had loved at 19. Not unchanged, changed significantly by the particular education of loss, but present. Actually present in a way he had not been for years. "Bring it Tuesday," she said. Something broke open in his face. Not dramatically, just open. "Tuesday," he said. "Come to the cottage," she said. "We'll need the table, and bring whatever account documents the assessor gave you. If your father's survey connects to mine the way I think it might, we should be working from both." "I'll bring everything," he said. She nodded and went back to her notes. She heard him walk away. She heard him say something to Henry Miller. Something low and direct. She couldn't make out the words, and she heard Henry Miller laugh the way he laughed when something pleased him genuinely. She pressed her hand once against the stone of the spring basin. Still cold. Still real. Still running. The weeks that followed were the strangest and most honest of Charlotte's life. Nathaniel came on Tuesday with his father's survey and the assessor's documents and the careful attention of a man who had decided to mean what he said. They sat at Charlotte's kitchen table, The table she had bought herself in the cottage, she was building into something that was entirely and specifically hers, and they worked. He asked questions. Real questions, not performance questions, the kind that meant he had thought about something before asking it, that he genuinely didn't know the answer and wasn't embarrassed about not knowing. She answered them directly, without softening, without managing his reaction to the information. Just the truth, plainly delivered the way she had always wanted to be able to work. It was different than anything they had been before. It was harder and more real and considerably more worth doing. He came back Thursday. He came the following Tuesday. He started showing up at the spring site when she was doing maintenance checks, not to oversee, but to learn, standing back watching, asking James questions, with the same careful attention he brought to the kitchen table sessions. James, for his part, answered him with a directness that Charlotte appreciated, and that Nathaniel, to his credit, received without flinching. December came. The first snow fell on a Wednesday, and Charlotte stood in the doorway of the cottage and watched it settle over the east ridge, over the containment structure, over the fields that were running on clean water for the first time in 4 years. And she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Something that was entirely her own, that no one had given her and no one could take away. She had built it. From a candle and a trunk, and her father's survey book, and 2 months of work that everyone thought was grief. It was not grief. It had never been grief. It had been exactly what she said it was. She had taken care of it. On a Tuesday in late December, Nathaniel came to the cottage, as he had been coming every week, with documents and questions and the small evidence of a man making himself into something better than he had been. He sat at the table. Charlotte set tea down. They worked through the final sections of the land reconciliation, the mapping of the Springs water system against the original estate survey, which had revealed exactly what Charlotte had suspected. The 2 surveys told one complete story, and it had taken both of them, his father's and hers, to understand it. When they finished, Nathaniel set the papers down and looked at her. "It's a better estate," he said. "Than it was. Than it's ever been, actually. The numbers coming out of the south fields are what they should have been for years," Charlotte said. "Because of you," he said. "Because of the work," she said. "Because you understood something that mattered and held on to it and built something real with it," he said. "Because you." He met her eyes. "I need you to let me say that. Not to give me credit, not to make me feel better. Because it's true, and it needs to be said with your name attached to it." Charlotte looked at him. "It's true," she said. "I know it's true," he said. "I'm saying it out loud." She held his gaze. The cottage was warm. The spring was running. The county was going into winter with water secured and harvest documented, and 6 families with legal agreements that protected them and the Bennett estate, with accounts that finally told the truth, and 2 people sitting at a kitchen table who were learning slowly and honestly and without pretense what it meant to see each other. "Nathaniel," she said. "Charlotte," he said. "Ask your question," she said. He blinked. "I didn't. You've been trying to ask something for 20 minutes, she said. "I can see it. Ask." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is there a way back? Not to what we were. I know that's gone. But is there a way forward to something better than what we had?" Charlotte looked at the man across her table. The man who had trimmed the roses carefully without being asked, who had shown up to a meeting as one among 6 and not flinched, who had come back every Tuesday and Thursday and asked real questions and written down the answers and meant what he said more consistently with every week that passed. Not perfect, not without cost, but real. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I'm willing to find out." He exhaled. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough. It's a start," she said. She picked up her pen. "Now," she said. "The North Section water mapping. Let's finish it." He opened his notebook, and they worked. That was how it went, not with grand declarations, not with the kind of theatrical reunion that erases what came before. with work, with Tuesday and Thursday, and a kitchen table, and questions asked and answered honestly, and the slow, patient, entirely unspectacular building of something that had never quite existed before between them, something that had both their names on it, something that could not be given away or signed over or handed to someone else with a pen pushed across a dining room table. Something that had been built from the ground up the way the most important things always are, not from what you're handed, but from what you choose to understand, to tend to protect, and to claim as your own. Charlotte Bennett had lost a home in August. By December, she had something better. She had land that knew her name, work that bore her mark, a spring her father had found, and she had brought into the light, and the absolute unshakable, deeply earned knowledge that she had never needed anyone to give her value. She had always known where it was,